Imagine discovering that your government has been lying to you about the greatest threat humanity has ever faced. Imagine learning that while officials tell you everything is normal, they've been secretly building underground cities for themselves and their families. Imagine realising that 300 million Americans have been marked as acceptable losses in a disaster that's not a matter of if, but when. This is a story based on real geological science, actual government protocols, and the terrifying possibility that the truth about Yellowstone is being hidden from you right now. What happens when the greatest natural disaster in human history has been predicted, planned for, and hidden from the public? When a junior geologist stumbles upon evidence that the Yellowstone supervolcano isn't dormant, it's being managed. He discovers that some truths are worth killing for. Special thanks to Nicola for this incredible story concept and detailed research that made this narrative possible. Yellowstone National Park Monitoring Station, October the 15th, 2014. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Eli Grant barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the seismic readout scrolling across his monitor, watching patterns that shouldn't exist dance across the screen like digital ghosts. At 24, fresh out of graduate school with a geology degree from Colorado State, Eli had spent the last 3 months as a USGS intern learning that monitoring America's most dangerous supervolcano was mostly routine data collection, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. This was one of those moments. The microquakes were coming from depths that made his stomach turn. 15 miles down, deeper than any recorded activity in Yellowstone's 30-year digital monitoring history. The frequency was wrong too, clustered in tight bursts rather than the random scatter typical of normal geothermal activity. Each tremor registered between 1.2 and 1.8 on the Richter scale, small enough to be dismissed individually, but together they painted a picture that made Eli's hand shake as he reached for his phone. Before he could dial his supervisor, the screen flickered. The anomalous readings vanished, replaced by a steady green line indicating normal background activity. A automated message popped up. Calibration complete. Data archived. Eli stared at the empty screen. 15 minutes of unprecedented deep seismic activity had just been erased as if it never existed. He quickly navigated to the backup servers, his fingers flying across the keyboard with increasing desperation. The raw data files were gone. The automated alerts had been cleared. Even the emergency notification logs showed nothing but routine system maintenance. Working late again, kid? Eli spun around to find Karen Holt standing in the doorway, her park ranger uniform still crisp despite the late hour. At 52, Karen had been patrolling Yellowstone's backcountry for over 2 decades, and her weathered face carried the kind of knowledge that came from watching the park's moods change with the seasons. Karen, did you feel anything about an hour ago? Any tremors? She studied his face carefully before stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. You saw something on the monitors? Deep quakes, deeper than anything in the database, but they're gone now, scrubbed clean like they never happened. Karen was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the sanitized readouts. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight Eli had never heard before. How long have you been working here, Eli? 3 months. Long enough to know what you're looking at, not long enough to know what you're not supposed to see. She pulled up a chair beside him. Let me ask you something. You know why they put the monitoring station here instead of closer to the caldera? Eli shrugged. Better communication links, I assumed. Easier access for maintenance. That's what they tell the interns. Karen's fingers drummed against the desk. The real reason is that certain types of data collection work better from a distance. Gives you time to curate what goes into the public record. The implication hit Eli like a physical blow. Are you saying they're hiding seismic data? I'm saying that 23 years of watching this place has taught me that Yellowstone keeps secrets, and some people are very invested in keeping those secrets buried. She stood up, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder. Don't start asking questions you're not ready to answer, Eli. This park isn't just about geysers. After she left, Eli sat alone in the monitoring station, staring at the clean, normal readouts. but Karen's warning had sparked something dangerous: curiosity. He pulled up the archived database and began searching for gaps, periods where data might have been scrubbed before. What he found made his pulse quicken. Small deletions in 2009, 2004 and 1997. Always deep seismic activity. Always erased within hours of being recorded. Always during periods when public attention was focused elsewhere. Economic crashes, natural disasters, political scandals. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. Eli spent the rest of the night copying every piece of raw data he could access onto external drives, working with the methodical precision of someone who understood that some opportunities only came once. By dawn, he had assembled a fragmentary picture of Yellowstone's hidden activity dating back 15 years. The supervolcano wasn't dormant. It was being watched, monitored, and most importantly hidden from public view. As the sun rose over the Yellowstone River, Eli Grant became the first person outside the conspiracy to see the full scope of what was coming. What he didn't know was that his discovery had already been noted by systems designed to catch exactly this kind of unauthorized access. In a secure facility 300 miles away, automated alerts were already being generated, and decisions were being made about what to do with a curious young geologist who had seen too much. Chapter 1: The Official Story. Yellowstone National Park Headquarters, March 22nd, 2015. The press briefing room was packed with reporters from every major network, their cameras trained on the panel of scientists seated behind a table adorned with official USGS and National Park Service seals. Outside, early spring snow dusted the peaks surrounding Mammoth Hot Springs, but inside the room, the atmosphere was warm with the heat of television lights and simmering questions about Yellowstone's recent activity. Eli stood at the back of the room, his USGS badge giving him access to the media event despite his junior status. In the 5 months since he'd first witnessed the data scrubbing, he'd kept his head down and his mouth shut, but he'd also kept watching. The patterns were becoming clearer and more disturbing with each passing week. Chief Park Scientist Janet Morrison stepped up to the microphone, her grey hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her no-nonsense expression. "Good morning. I want to address the speculation that's been circulating online regarding recent seismic activity in Yellowstone National Park." Eli noticed how she avoided mentioning the source of that speculation, a viral video showing hundreds of elk and bison streaming out of the Lamar Valley in what appeared to be a coordinated exodus. The footage had been taken by a tourist 3 weeks earlier and had garnered over 2 million views before park officials managed to provide alternative explanations. "Based on our continuous monitoring of the Yellowstone volcanic system," Morrison continued, "I can state categorically that no eruption is imminent. The seismic activity recorded over the past month falls well within normal parameters for this geologically active region." A reporter from CNN raised her hand. "But what about the animal migrations? Local ranchers are reporting unusual behaviour in wildlife populations. Seasonal migration patterns can vary significantly based on weather conditions, food availability, and natural population cycles," Morrison replied smoothly. "What some observers have interpreted as unusual behaviour is actually quite normal for this time of year." Eli bit back the urge to laugh. He'd seen the internal memos describing the animal movements as unprecedented and potentially indicative of subsurface environmental changes. The scientists on this panel knew exactly what was causing the animals to flee, but they were standing in front of cameras and lying about it with practiced ease. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, each one deflected with rehearsed responses that provided just enough technical detail to sound authoritative while revealing absolutely nothing of substance. As the briefing ended and reporters filed out, Eli lingered near the back of the room, watching the scientists pack up their materials. Impressive performance. Eli turned to find a man in his 40s wearing a FEMA windbreaker, his identification badge hanging from a lanyard around his neck. Deputy Director Marcus Webb, according to the credential. "I'm sorry?" "The briefing. Very professional. Of course, the real challenge isn't managing the press, it's managing the logistics. Webb's smile was friendly, but his eyes remained cold. You're Eli Grant, aren't you? The intern who's been asking interesting questions. Eli's mouth went dry. I don't know what you mean. Database queries at odd hours, unusual download activity, IT security flags that kind of behaviour automatically. Webb stepped closer, lowering his voice. Don't worry. Curiosity is natural in your line of work, but there are some areas where curiosity can become problematic. Are you threatening me? I'm offering advice. FEMA has been conducting training exercises in this region for several months now. Interagency coordination, emergency response protocols, that sort of thing. You might have noticed our vehicles around the park. Eli had noticed. Black SUVs and unmarked trucks had been appearing at various locations throughout Yellowstone, always accompanied by personnel who claimed to be conducting routine training exercises. The timing seemed suspicious. Why increase emergency preparedness training just as seismic activity was being actively suppressed from public records? What kind of training? Webb's smile widened. Zone 5 evacuation protocols. Very comprehensive, very necessary. He handed Eli a business card. If you ever want to know more about emergency preparedness, give me a call. But remember, some knowledge comes with responsibilities. After Webb walked away, Eli stood alone in the empty briefing room, turning the card over in his hands. Zone 5 evacuation protocols. He'd never heard the term before, despite his security clearance and access to most FEMA documentation. That night, he spent hours searching through official databases, finding references to Zones 1 through 4, but nothing about Zone 5. Whatever Webb was talking about, it existed outside the normal chain of command and public accountability. The realization sent a chill down Eli's spine that had nothing to do with the late spring snow falling outside his apartment window. 3 days later, Karen Holt found him in the monitoring station, hunched over his computer with the intensity of someone racing against time. You're digging deeper, she observed, and not bothering to make it a question. Someone has to. They're lying to everyone, Karen. The seismic data, the animal behaviour, the FEMA exercises, none of it adds up to the story they're telling the public. Karen closed the door and activated the white noise generator that was supposedly used to prevent electronic eavesdropping during sensitive conferences. What do you know about the Deep Bore project? Never heard of it. Officially, it never existed. Unofficially, it was a joint USGS military operation that ran from 2008 to 2012. The cover story was installation of advanced seismic monitoring equipment in previously inaccessible areas of the park. And the real story? Pressure venting? They were drilling down to the magma chamber and installing systems designed to release pressure in controlled amounts, potentially delaying or preventing a catastrophic eruption. Eli stared at her. That's actually brilliant. Why would they hide something like that? Because it didn't work. The magma chamber is too large, too unstable. The venting systems were supposed to buy us decades. Instead, they may have accelerated the timeline. Karen's face was grim. One of the contractors died during the installation phase. Officially, it was an industrial accident. Unofficially, he was murdered to prevent him from talking about what he'd discovered down there. What did he discover? That the eruption isn't a matter of if, Eli. It's a matter of when. And when is a lot sooner than anyone is willing to admit publicly. As Karen left him alone with this revelation, Eli found himself staring at the sanitized seismic readouts with new understanding. The data scrubbing wasn't just about hiding Yellowstone's activity from the public. It was about hiding the failure of a desperate attempt to prevent the greatest natural disaster in human history. And somewhere, people with access to the real data were making plans that didn't include the 300 million Americans living in the path of destruction. Chapter 2. The Elite Plan. USGS Regional Office, Denver, September 14th, 2016. The security badge scanner beeped as Eli swiped his credential, granting him access to the restricted archives beneath the Denver Federal Building. 18 months had passed since his first glimpse of the conspiracy, and his official duties had gradually shifted from basic monitoring to special projects, a euphemism for working on data sets that required higher security clearances and absolute discretion. What his supervisors didn't know was that Eli had been using his expanded access to piece together a puzzle that grew more terrifying with each new fragment of information he uncovered. The file he'd been looking for was buried in a section marked HLT 2030, nestled between routine geological surveys and budget projections for monitoring equipment. Hazard level threshold 2030. The designation meant nothing to most people, but Eli had learned to recognize the bureaucratic camouflage used to hide the most sensitive documents. He opened the file with trembling fingers. The first page was a summary that made his vision blur. Probabilistic eruption window, 2028 to 2032. Confidence interval, 94.7%. Recommended public disclosure timeline, none. Eli had to read the last line 3 times before its meaning sank in. They had narrowed down the eruption timeline to a 4-year window with near certainty, and the official recommendation was to tell the public nothing. The next section detailed evacuation protocols that divided the American population into 2 distinct categories. Tier 1 included federal government personnel, military leadership, critical infrastructure managers, and selected scientific and medical professionals, approximately 2.3 million people, who would receive advance warning and priority evacuation to designated safe zones. Tier 2 encompassed everyone else, 327 million Americans whose evacuation status was listed with brutal honesty as no viable plan. Eli scrolled through page after page of logistical nightmares and resource calculations. The ash fallout zone would render most of the continental United States uninhabitable for years. The immediate kill zone, a radius of approximately 700 miles from the eruption site, would experience pyroclastic flows, toxic gas emissions, and complete ecological collapse. Even with advance warning, there weren't enough resources to evacuate more than a fraction of the affected population. But the most damning section came toward the end. Cross-reference construction projects that had been authorized and funded over the past decade. Underground facilities in Colorado, Utah, and South Dakota, officially described as continuity of government installations or strategic resource storage sites. The locations formed a clear pattern, far enough from Yellowstone to avoid the immediate devastation, supplied with independent power and air filtration systems, and sized to accommodate the Tier 1 population for extended periods. None of the facilities were located in Wyoming or Montana, the states that would bear the brunt of the initial eruption. The people living in those areas, including Eli himself, were considered acceptable losses. A sound in the corridor outside made Eli freeze. Footsteps were approaching the archive room, accompanied by the low murmur of voices. He quickly photographed the most critical pages with his phone, replaced the file, and pretended to be reviewing mundane seismic reports. The door opened to reveal Deputy Director Webb and a woman Eli didn't recognize, both wearing the kind of serious expressions that accompanied discussions of national security. "Grant," Webb nodded, "working late again, I see." "Just catching up on some routine analysis," Eli replied, hoping his voice sounded steadier than he felt. The woman studied him with interest. "You're the intern who's been flagged for unusual database access patterns. I prefer to think of myself as thorough." Webb laughed, but the sound held no humour. "Thoroughness is admirable. Discretion is essential. I trust you understand the distinction." After they left, Eli sat alone in the archive room, staring at the photos on his phone. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. A small group of government officials and scientists had known for years that Yellowstone was approaching a catastrophic eruption, and their response had been to save themselves while leaving everyone else to die. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. Hundreds of millions of people were going about their daily lives, making plans for the future, raising children and building careers, completely unaware that their government had already written them off as collateral damage in a disaster that could be predicted but not prevented. That night, Eli returned to his apartment in Gardner, Montana, with a decision crystallizing in his mind. The evidence he'd gathered was enough to expose the conspiracy, but he needed more. Documentation that would be impossible to dismiss or discredit. He also needed a way to get the information to journalists who couldn't be intimidated or bought off. What he didn't know was that his activities in the archive had been monitored in real time, and that his phone's camera had triggered security algorithms designed to detect unauthorized photography of classified documents. By the time he fell asleep that night, plans were already being made to ensure that Eli Grant's investigation would end before it could threaten the carefully constructed wall of silence surrounding Yellowstone's deadly secret. Chapter 3: The Suppression. Gardner, Montana, November the 8th, 2016. Eli's apartment had been turned upside down with surgical precision. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out and dumped, every electronic device missing or destroyed. But the most telling detail was what the intruders hadn't done. They'd left his television, his expensive hiking equipment, and the cash he kept in a kitchen drawer. This wasn't a random burglary. Someone had been looking for specific items and they'd found them. His laptop was gone. His external hard drives were missing. Even his backup thumb drives, hidden in a hollowed-out book, had been discovered and taken. Months of carefully gathered evidence had vanished in a single night, leaving behind only the photos on his phone. Photos he'd been smart enough to upload to a secure cloud storage account before going to bed. Eli stood in his wrecked living room, surveying the damage with a mixture of fear and determination. They'd sent a message: stop digging, or face consequences. But they'd also confirmed that his investigation was getting close to something they desperately wanted to keep hidden. His phone buzzed with a text from Karen: "Meet me at Mammoth Terraces, North Side, come alone." 30 minutes later, Eli found Karen standing on the limestone terraces that gave Mammoth Hot Springs its name, her park ranger uniform stark against the white mineral deposits. Steam rose from the thermal features around them, creating an otherworldly landscape that felt appropriate for the conversation they were about to have. "They hit your place," she said without preamble. "How did you know?" "Because they're watching all of us now. Anyone who's asked too many questions, anyone who's shown too much interest in the wrong data." Karen gestured toward the thermal features. "You see these springs? They've been active for thousands of years, but their flow patterns have changed dramatically in the past 18 months. The thermal system is destabilizing. Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know what you've stumbled into." Karen's expression was grim. "I told you I worked on the Deep Bore project." "What I didn't tell you is why I really left." She led him away from the main viewing area, down a maintenance trail that wound behind the limestone formations. The drilling operation was based out of a temporary facility near the Norris Geyser Basin. Officially, we were installing seismic monitoring equipment at depth that would provide better data about magma chamber activity. But that wasn't the real purpose. The real purpose was to tap into the magma chamber and create controlled release valves. The theory was sound. If you could bleed off pressure gradually, you might prevent a catastrophic eruption, or at least delay it long enough to develop better evacuation procedures. They emerged onto a small plateau that offered a clear view of the valley below. In the distance, Eli could see the geometric lines of roads and buildings that marked human presence in the wilderness, tiny and fragile against the vast landscape. What went wrong? Everything. The magma chamber is far more complex than the models predicted. Instead of bleeding off pressure, the venting systems created new pathways for thermal activity. The timeline for eruption may have been accelerated rather than delayed. Karen pulled a small device from her pocket, an encrypted satellite phone that Eli recognized as military hardware. Tom Rodriguez was the lead contractor on the drilling team. Geothermal engineer, 23 years of experience, 3 kids. He started asking questions about why the pressure readings weren't matching the theoretical models. What happened to him? Vehicle accident on a mountain road. Lost control on a curve, went over a cliff. Very tragic. Very convenient. Karen's jaw tightened. except Tom was one of the most careful drivers I'd ever met, and he'd driven that road hundreds of times. Also, his personal notes about the pressure anomalies disappeared from his trailer the same night he died. The implication was clear and terrifying. Eli was looking at a conspiracy that had already committed murder to protect its secrets. His ransacked apartment wasn't just a warning, it was a preview of what could happen if he continued to threaten their operational security. Why haven't you gone public with this? With what? A story about a secret government project with no documentation, a convenient accident with no witnesses, and seismic data that gets scrubbed from official records. Karen shook her head. They've been very careful to keep everything compartmentalized. Most of the people involved only know pieces of the puzzle. But together we know enough to expose them. Together we know enough to get killed. Karen handed him the satellite phone. This is encrypted and routes through military satellites. They can't monitor it easily. If something happens to me, use it to contact investigative journalists. The access codes are programmed in. As they walked back toward the main trail, Eli felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was now part of a resistance movement he'd never asked to join, fighting against a conspiracy that had resources and ruthlessness he could barely comprehend. That night, he uploaded everything he'd learned to multiple secure cloud accounts, created encrypted copies of all his evidence, and began drafting detailed summaries that could be understood by journalists without scientific backgrounds. If something happened to him, the truth would still survive. What he didn't know was that Karen Holt had already been marked for elimination, and that his own name had moved to the top of a very short list of people who knew too much to be allowed to live. The conspiracy had spent years perfecting the art of making problematic people disappear without raising suspicions. Eli Grant was about to discover just how efficient they'd become. Chapter 4: The False Flag. Lamar Valley, Yellowstone National Park, June 15th, 2017. The video went viral within hours of being uploaded. Shot on a tourist's smartphone from the Lamar Valley overlook, it showed something that no park official could easily explain away. Nearly 1,000 bison streaming eastward in a coordinated exodus that looked more like a military retreat than seasonal migration. Eli watched the footage for the 12th time, pausing on frames that showed the animals' behaviour. Their ears were pinned back, their movements urgent and purposeful. These weren't animals wandering to new grazing areas. They were fleeing something that had triggered every survival instinct evolution had given them. The official response came within 6 hours. Park spokeswoman Janet Morrison appeared on CNN to explain that large herbivore migrations were completely normal, and that social media was creating panic over natural phenomena that occur regularly in Yellowstone. What Morrison didn't mention was that the bison were fleeing from a section of the park that had been closed to public access for the past 3 months. The Norris Back Basin, officially under restoration, after minor geothermal changes, was actually experiencing subsurface temperatures that had increased by nearly 40 degrees Celsius in the past year. Eli had seen the classified reports. New fumaroles were opening weekly. The ground temperature was rising so rapidly that park maintenance crews couldn't approach the monitoring equipment without protective suits. Most telling of all, the area was showing magnetic anomalies consistent with massive metallic intrusions, exactly what you'd expect if the magma chamber was rising toward the surface. His phone buzzed with a message from Karen. "Need to show you something. Tonight, usual place." They met after midnight at the Mammoth Terraces, their breath visible in the cold mountain air. Karen looked haggard, her face showing the strain of months spent living with dangerous knowledge. "I've been monitoring radio traffic from the restricted zones," she said without preamble. "FEMA has been conducting something called Operation Continuity. Not training exercises, actual deployment." "Deployment of what?" "Command and control infrastructure. They've been installing communication arrays, power systems, and what sounds like permanent housing facilities." Karen pulled out a topographic map marked with red circles. "All of these locations correspond to abandoned Cold War bunkers or natural cave systems. They're building something underground. Eli studied the map. The marked locations formed a rough circle around the Yellowstone caldera, each one positioned outside the immediate blast zone but close enough to maintain operational oversight of the area. How many people could these facilities support? Based on the supply manifests I've been able to intercept, maybe 2,000 people per facility. Enough for essential government personnel and their families, plus a skeleton crew to maintain basic infrastructure. The scope of the deception was staggering. While telling the public that Yellowstone posed no immediate threat, the government was quietly building underground cities designed to preserve a small fraction of the population through the greatest natural disaster in human history. I want to see one of these facilities. Karen shook her head. Too dangerous. They've got military-grade security at all the sites now. Then how do we prove any of this exists? We don't. Not directly. Karen handed him a small device that looked like a modified GPS unit. But we can document the construction activity. This is a ground-penetrating radar unit, modified to detect large underground structures. If we can map the facilities from the surface, we can prove they exist without having to penetrate their security. 2 nights later, they drove to a remote area near the Shoshone National Forest, following Forest Service roads that weren't marked on any public maps. The official designation was a wildlife research station, but the facilities visible from the access road looked more like a military installation than a scientific outpost. Chain-link fencing topped with razor wire surrounded the compound. Guard towers equipped with searchlights and what appeared to be automated weapon systems monitored the perimeter. Most telling of all, massive air conditioning units and ventilation systems indicated that whatever was happening here required significant life support infrastructure. Karen set up the ground-penetrating radar while Eli photographed everything he could see from their concealed position. The radar readings revealed the truth. Beneath the modest surface facilities lay a complex that extended at least 5 levels underground, with enough space to house thousands of people for extended periods. "My God," Eli whispered as he studied the readouts. "It's like an underground city." "One of at least 6 that we know of," Karen replied. "And this is just what they're building in Wyoming and Montana. Intelligence suggests similar facilities are under construction throughout the western United States." As they packed up their equipment, Eli felt a mixture of vindication and terror. They now had proof that the government was secretly preparing for a Yellowstone eruption, while publicly denying any threat existed. But they also had evidence of a conspiracy so vast and well-funded that challenging it openly would be tantamount to suicide. The drive back to Gardner was tense and quiet. Both of them understood that they'd crossed a line tonight, moving from passive observation to active intelligence gathering. The people behind the conspiracy would not tolerate this kind of direct surveillance for long. Karen was right to be worried. Unknown to either of them, their activities had been monitored by satellite surveillance systems designed to detect exactly this kind of unauthorized reconnaissance. Facial recognition algorithms had identified them both, and their vehicle's license plate had been flagged in law enforcement databases across the region. Within hours, orders would be issued for their immediate apprehension and detention. The conspiracy had decided that Karen Holt and Eli Grant had become too dangerous to remain free. But first, they had to be isolated from any support networks or escape routes. The plan that had been set in motion would ensure that when they disappeared, no one would think to look for them until it was far too late to matter. Chapter 5. The Smoking Gun. Secure conference room, undisclosed location, August 3rd, 2017. The recording device was smaller than a matchbox, designed to look like a routine equipment monitoring sensor of the type found throughout government facilities. Eli had placed it in the ventilation system of conference room C7 3 hours earlier, using his maintenance access codes to enter the secure wing of the Denver Federal Building. What he captured on that device would become the smoking gun that proved everything he'd suspected about the Yellowstone conspiracy. The voices on the recording were clearly identifiable. Deputy Director Webb from FEMA, Assistant Secretary of Interior Patricia Vance, and at least 2 other officials whose identities Eli couldn't immediately determine. The conversation was conducted with the casual tone of people who believed they were speaking in complete privacy. "The latest projections show we're ahead of schedule," Webb's voice came through clearly. "Thermal expansion in the Norris sector is accelerating faster than the models predicted." "How much faster?" Vance asked. 18 to 24 months ahead of the original timeline. We may be looking at a 2029 event rather than 2031. The sound of papers shuffling was audible before another voice joined the conversation. "The infrastructure projects are proceeding on schedule, but we'll need to accelerate the relocation of essential personnel if the timeline has moved up." "What about public disclosure?" Vance asked. Webb's laugh was bitter. "Public disclosure remains a non-option. We've run every scenario through the simulation models. Even with a full year of advance warning, we couldn't evacuate more than 15% of the affected population. The interstate system would collapse within hours, supply chains would break down completely, and we'd face massive social unrest that would interfere with Tier 1 evacuation procedures." "So we maintain the current posture?" "We maintain the lie," Webb corrected. "Continue the public briefings about normal seismic activity. Continue dismissing online speculation as conspiracy theories. And most importantly, continue the media relationships that keep investigative journalists focused on other stories." Eli's hands trembled as he listened to the casual discussion of abandoning hundreds of millions of people to die. These weren't comic book villains plotting world domination. They were mid-level government bureaucrats who had decided that preserving their own lives and positions was more important than honouring their oath to serve the public. The recording continued with logistical discussions that were even more damning. Supply caches were being positioned at the underground facilities. Communication networks that would remain operational during and after the eruption were being tested. Even arrangements for maintaining genetic diversity in the post-eruption population were being planned with clinical efficiency. "What about the monitoring station personnel?" an unidentified voice asked. "Some of them are asking uncomfortable questions." "We're handling that," Webb replied. "Enhanced security protocols, selective information sharing, and when necessary, personnel reassignments to less sensitive positions." "What about the ones who have already seen too much?" "Problem solved," Webb's voice carried a note of finality that made Eli's stomach turn. "The park ranger who was asking questions about the Deep Bore project will be transferred to a remote station in Alaska next week. A routine reassignment that gets her away from Yellowstone and limits her access to sensitive information. Karen." They were talking about Karen, and Eli knew with sickening certainty that her reassignment would be permanent in ways that had nothing to do with Park Service bureaucracy. The meeting concluded with assignments and timelines that painted a clear picture of a conspiracy in its final phases. The underground facilities would be fully operational by 2028. Essential personnel would begin training exercises that were actually disguised evacuations by early 2029, and the public would remain completely unaware until the eruption made further secrecy impossible. Eli retrieved the recording device later that night, his heart pounding as he navigated the empty corridors of the federal building. The evidence he now possessed was explosive enough to bring down the entire conspiracy, if he could find a way to get it to journalists who couldn't be intimidated or discredited. But first he had to warn Karen about her impending reassignment. He tried calling her cell phone but got no answer. Her ranger station reported that she was off duty and couldn't be reached for routine inquiries. Growing increasingly worried, Eli drove to her apartment in Mammoth Hot Springs, only to find it dark and apparently empty. Karen's supervisor, when Eli finally tracked him down, was apologetic but unhelpful. "Officer Holt has been temporarily assigned to a special project in Alaska. She left this morning on a charter flight. Very sudden, but you know how it is with Park Service priorities." Eli knew exactly how it was. Karen Holt had become a liability, and liabilities were being eliminated with bureaucratic efficiency. Her disappearance was a warning and a preview of his own fate if he continued to threaten the conspiracy's operational security. That night, he uploaded the recording to multiple secure servers and began reaching out to investigative journalists whose work suggested they couldn't be easily intimidated. The evidence was now beyond their ability to suppress completely, but Eli understood that possessing it had made him the most dangerous man in America. He was no longer just a witness to the conspiracy. He was the only person outside their organisation who could prove it existed, and that made him a target that couldn't be allowed to remain free. Chapter 6. The Countdown. Gardner, Montana, November 12, 2017. The email from ProPublica journalist Michael Chen arrived at 3:47 a.m, marked with encryption protocols that indicated he'd taken Eli's warnings about government surveillance seriously. The message was brief, but electrifying. Audio verified by 3 independent sources. Document analysis confirms authenticity. Ready to publish. Need secure meeting to discuss protection protocols. Eli had been living as a fugitive in his own life for 3 months, changing locations nightly and communicating only through encrypted channels. The strain was showing. He'd lost 20 pounds, developed chronic insomnia, and started checking his rearview mirror obsessively whenever he drove. But Chen's message confirmed that the months of careful evidence gathering had finally produced results that couldn't be dismissed or discredited. What Eli didn't know was that his encrypted communications had been compromised for weeks, and that every message he'd sent to journalists was being monitored by the same people he was trying to expose. The conspiracy's response was swift and multi-pronged. Within hours of Chen's message, every major news network received exclusive briefings from USGS officials debunking dangerous misinformation about Yellowstone. The briefings included carefully edited seismic data, testimonials from concerned scientists about the psychological damage caused by eruption rumours, and veiled threats about the national security implications of spreading geological panic. Chen's editor killed the story before it could be published. The official reason was insufficient corroboration from government sources. The real reason became clear when Chen contacted Eli through secure channels. ProPublica's major donors had received calls from federal officials suggesting that publishing unverified geological speculation could affect the organisation's non-profit status. But the conspiracy had underestimated the modern information landscape. Eli's evidence had been distributed to dozens of journalists, bloggers, and citizen researchers, while mainstream media outlets could be pressured into silence. The decentralised nature of online publishing made complete suppression impossible. On November the 15th, the story broke simultaneously across 17 different platforms. Independent journalists published the recordings. Geology professors confirmed the technical details. Former government employees provided additional context about the classified facilities. Within 48 hours, #Yellowstone conspiracy was trending globally. The government's response was predictable and desperate. Official spokespeople dismissed the evidence as sophisticated disinformation designed to undermine public confidence in scientific institutions. The recordings were declared fabricated using advanced audio manipulation technology. Alternative explanations were provided for every piece of evidence Eli had gathered, but the dam had broken. Whistleblowers within the conspiracy began coming forward with additional documentation. Satellite images of the underground facilities appeared online. Construction workers who had built the secret bunkers shared their stories. Karen Holt, who had been held at a debriefing facility in Alaska, was released and immediately went public with her testimony about the Deep Bore project. The revelation that the government had been planning to abandon 300 million Americans to die while saving only a privileged few sparked the largest protests in American history. Demonstrations erupted in every major city. Congressional hearings were demanded. International allies expressed outrage at being kept in the dark about a disaster that would affect global climate and agriculture. Most importantly, real evacuation planning finally began. With the truth exposed, it became impossible to maintain the fiction that Yellowstone posed no threat. Scientists worked around the clock to develop actual emergency response procedures. International cooperation emerged as other countries offered to assist with evacuation and resettlement efforts. Chapter 7. The Final Message. Yellowstone National Park, January 20th, 2029. Eli stood on the Lamar Valley overlook, watching steam rise from thermal features that had doubled in intensity over the past 18 months. The park was nearly empty now. Evacuations had begun 6 months earlier when seismic activity had become impossible to hide. The animals had fled long ago, following instincts older than human civilization. His phone buzzed with an encrypted message from the Global Yellowstone Monitoring Consortium, an international scientific collaboration that had formed after the conspiracy's exposure. Seismic precursors accelerating. Event window now estimated at 72 to 96 hours. Final evacuation protocols activated. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same evidence that the conspiracy had tried to suppress for decades was now being used to save millions of lives. The underground facilities that had been built for a privileged few were being converted into evacuation centres for ordinary families. The communication networks designed to preserve government continuity were now coordinating the largest humanitarian operation in human history. Not everyone could be saved. The logistics were still overwhelming, but transparency had enabled genuine preparation instead of elite preservation. International agreements had been signed to relocate climate refugees. Agricultural systems had been modified to function with altered growing conditions. Supply chains had been restructured to survive massive disruption. Eli's satellite phone rang. Karen's voice came through clearly from her position at the Evacuation Coordination Center in Denver. "Final transport leaves Gardner in 30 minutes, she reported. "You need to be on it." "I'll be there," Eli replied, but he remained standing on the overlook for several more minutes. Below him, Yellowstone spread out in its terrible beauty, a landscape that had remained largely unchanged for thousands of years, about to be transformed by forces that made human concerns seem trivial. His phone's camera was still recording as he delivered his final message. "This is Eli Grant, reporting from Yellowstone National Park on January 20th, 2029. In approximately 3 days, this place will become ground zero for the largest volcanic eruption in human history. But unlike the conspiracy originally planned, this won't be a secret apocalypse that kills hundreds of millions while saving a few thousand elites. Because the truth came out, we've had time to prepare. Not perfectly, not completely, but honestly. The people fleeing this region know what's coming and why. The international community is ready to help. The aftermath will be terrible, but it won't be hidden, and it won't be used to justify abandoning the principles of democratic society. If you're watching this from the future, remember that transparency saved lives. Remember that ordinary people, when given truth instead of lies, are capable of extraordinary cooperation. And remember that the greatest disasters are always made worse by the people who try to profit from them instead of preventing them." As he walked back to his truck for the final drive to the evacuation point, Eli felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not for avoiding the catastrophe, that was beyond human power to prevent, but hope that when the crisis came, humanity would face it together rather than divided by the lies of those who valued their own survival above everyone else's. Epilogue: The Quiet After the Storm. New Geneva, International Reconstruction Zone, January 20th, 2034. 5 years after the Yellowstone eruption, Eli Grant stood before the International Truth and Reconciliation Commission, delivering testimony that would help ensure such a conspiracy could never again threaten global security. The hearing was being broadcast live to millions of survivors in refugee communities across 6 continents. The eruption had been as devastating as predicted. Ash fallout had disrupted global agriculture for 3 years. Climate patterns had shifted dramatically, and large areas of North America remained uninhabitable. But because the truth had emerged in time, the disaster had brought out humanity's cooperative instincts rather than its destructive ones. The Yellowstone conspiracy taught us that the greatest threats to human survival aren't natural disasters. Eli concluded his testimony. They're the institutions that respond to those disasters by protecting themselves at the expense of everyone else. Transparency isn't just an ideal, it's a survival strategy. In the audience, Karen Holt nodded her approval. She now directed the Global Early Warning Network, an international organisation dedicated to ensuring that geological threats could never again be hidden from the public. Around the world, the underground facilities originally built for elite preservation had been converted into research stations, museums and memorials dedicated to democratic accountability. The Yellowstone conspiracy had been exposed just in time to save millions of lives, but more importantly, it had revealed the difference between a society that prepares for disaster together and one that allows the powerful to abandon everyone else when crisis strikes. As Eli walked out of the hearing room into the rebuilt world beyond, he carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are the ones we tell ourselves we're keeping for everyone's own good. The truth, no matter how terrifying, is always preferable to a lie that serves only the few at the expense of the many. Have you ever wondered why ancient monuments across the globe seem to align with mathematical precision? Why your GPS glitches in certain locations? Or why governments classify research about electromagnetic anomalies? Tonight's story might make you question every map you've ever trusted. Before we begin this journey into the hidden grid beneath our feet, I want to thank M10rapin for suggesting this topic. Your video ideas fuel these late-night tales, so please leave your suggestions in the comments below. And if you're ready to uncover the mysteries that keep you awake at night, make sure to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories. Now, dim your lights, settle in, and prepare to discover the truth about the lines that connect our world. My name is Alex Morrison, and I used to believe maps told the truth. As a GIS analyst, that's Geographic Information Systems for those who don't spend their days staring at satellite data and topographical overlays, I thought I understood how the world was organised. Cities here, mountains there, rivers cutting through valleys in predictable patterns carved by millions of years of erosion. Everything had a logical explanation. Everything could be mapped, measured and catalogued. That was before I found the pattern. It started innocently enough. Tuesday morning, October 15th, 8:47 a.m. I was hunched over my dual monitors in a cramped office in Brussels, working for Steinberg Construction Consortium. They'd hired me to evaluate potential sites for a new high-speed rail corridor that would connect Prague to Paris, part of the EU's Green Transportation Initiative. Routine work, overlay environmental data, check for protected sites, identify geological challenges. I'd done it 100 times before, but this time something was different. I was cross-referencing archaeological databases with our proposed route when I noticed it. A series of Neolithic monuments, stone circles, burial mounds, ancient wells, formed an almost perfect line across the landscape. Not just a few sites clustered together, but dozens of them, stretching for hundreds of miles. The proposed railway cut directly across this invisible corridor. At first, I laughed it off. Pattern recognition gone wild, I told myself. The human brain loves to find connections when none exist. But then I pulled up the magnetic anomaly data from the European Space Agency's swarm satellites. The coffee mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. The magnetic variations followed the exact same line. Every single monument sat on a point of electromagnetic disturbance. The precision was impossible. We're talking about structures built 5,000 years apart by cultures that supposedly never interacted, aligned within meters of a magnetic corridor that modern science had only just detected. I should have deleted the file, should have marked the route as approved and moved on with my life. Instead, I zoomed out. The line didn't stop at the edge of my survey area. It continued east through Romania, Turkey, Iran, west through England, across the Atlantic. I pulled up global archaeological databases, my fingers trembling as I plotted point after point. Stonehenge, Avebury, the Externstein, the Oracle at Delphi. Each site fell perfectly along extended trajectories of the same geometric pattern. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor. Morrison, railway assessment due by noon. Stop whatever rabbit hole you're going down." But I couldn't stop. I'd found something that shouldn't exist. A planetary grid mapped by ancient peoples who supposedly thought the Earth was flat, following electromagnetic patterns we'd only discovered in the last century. Either I was losing my mind or I'd stumbled onto the greatest archaeological discovery of the millennium. I chose to believe the latter. That was my first mistake. 3 weeks later, I stood in a frost-covered field 40 kilometres outside Prague, watching my equipment fail in ways that defied every principle of engineering I knew. After discovering the alignment, I'd convinced Steinberg to let me conduct field surveys along the proposed route. Geological stability assessment, I'd called it. What I really wanted was to stand on one of these intersection points myself, to take readings that might explain how ancient peoples had detected magnetic anomalies without compasses or magnetometers. The morning had started normally enough. I'd parked my van on a dirt road near the village of Holubice, unloaded my survey equipment, and hiked 2 kilometres to the first monument site, a circle of weathered standing stones that locals called Devil's Dance. The temperature hovered just above freezing, and mist clung to the valleys like cotton wool. I set up my differential GPS unit first, waiting for it to lock onto satellites. The device chirped, showing full signal strength. Then, as I walked toward the centre of the stone circle, the screen flickered. Acquiring satellites. Signal lost. Acquiring satellites. I checked my phone. Same problem. The GPS app showed my location jumping wildly, placing me first in Prague, then Vienna, then somehow in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. My professional-grade survey unit, accurate to within centimetres under normal conditions, couldn't even determine which continent I was on. The electromagnetic field meter came next. The moment I switched it on, the needle slammed against the maximum reading and stayed there, quivering like it was fighting against invisible restraints. I'd seen similar readings near power lines or transformer stations, but we were in the middle of farmland. The nearest electrical infrastructure was kilometres away. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. An elderly woman stood at the edge of the field, wrapped in a thick wool shawl. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes the pale blue of winter sky. "I'm sorry," I called out in my broken Czech. She switched to accented English. "This place. It's not for outsiders, not for their machines." She gestured at my equipment with a gnarled finger. "I'm just conducting surveys for the railway," I explained, walking toward her, "making sure the ground is stable." She laughed, but there was no humour in it. "Stable? This line has been here since before the first stones were raised, before your railways, before your cities. Our ancestors knew to respect it, to build their monuments as, jak se říká, anchors, to keep the energy flowing properly." "Energy?" I pulled out my tablet, showing her the magnetic anomaly map. "You mean this? You know about the electromagnetic patterns?" Her eyes widened. For a moment she looked genuinely frightened. "You've mapped it? The whole grid?" She grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You must stop. Some knowledge isn't meant to be documented. They will come for you if you continue." "Who will come?" But she was already walking away, moving faster than seemed possible for someone her age. "The ones who already know," she called back. "The ones who've always known." I wanted to follow her, to demand answers, but my drone chose that moment to fall out of the sky. No warning, no gradual descent. 1 second it was hovering steadily. The next it dropped like a stone, smashing into the frozen ground 20 metres away. As I ran to retrieve it, I noticed something through the trees, a structure that didn't belong. Hidden behind a thick stand of pines was a concrete building, brutalist in design, with narrow windows like suspicious eyes. Military architecture, Cold War era by the look of it. The smart thing would have been to leave immediately. Instead, I collected my broken drone and hiked toward the building. The structure was abandoned but not ancient. Rust streaked the metal door, which hung open on failing hinges. Inside, fluorescent lights dangled from exposed wiring, and the walls were covered in mould that formed patterns like continental drift. But it was the maps that stopped me cold. The entire north wall was covered in them. Topographical maps, geological surveys, electromagnetic readings, layers upon layers of data, some dating back to the 1960s. Red strings connected pins at various locations, creating a web that stretched across Europe. And running through it all, marked in thick black ink, was the same line I'd found, the same impossible alignment. In the corner, barely legible, someone had written, "Earth Grid Project, classified, destroy after review." I pulled out my phone to photograph everything, but the camera wouldn't focus. Every image came out distorted, as if the very air in the room was bending light. I tried sketching what I saw instead, my hands shaking from more than cold. A metal filing cabinet in the corner had been forced open, its contents mostly removed or destroyed, but wedged behind the bottom drawer I found a single folder. Water damage had made most of it illegible, but I could make out fragments. Electromagnetic conductivity peaks at intersection points. Ancient structures appear to function as regulatory nodes. Catastrophic potential if grid destabilizes. Project terminated by Joint Commission directive. The last page was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable. It showed a massive antenna array in what looked like Alaska, the same distinctive design I'd seen in conspiracy documentaries about HAARP. But this photo was dated 1971, decades before HAARP officially existed. A sound outside made me freeze. The crunch of footsteps on frost. Multiple sets, moving with military precision. I shoved the folder inside my jacket and slipped out the back window, dropping into a thorny hedge that tore at my clothes. Through the trees, I could see dark vehicles pulling up to the building, men in unmarked uniforms spreading out to surround it. I ran, not toward my van, they'd certainly have someone watching it, but deeper into the forest, following a deer trail that wound toward the next village. Behind me I heard shouting in a language I didn't recognise. Not Czech, not German, something else. It took me 4 hours to circle back to my vehicle, approaching from the opposite direction through farmland. The van was untouched, but I knew they'd let me go. Let me run. They wanted to see what I'd do next, who I'd contact. As I drove away, hand steady on the wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I realised the old woman had been right. Some knowledge wasn't meant to be documented, but it was too late now. I'd seen the grid, seen evidence that governments knew about it, had studied it, had classified it, and I was going to find out why. My apartment in Brussels became a command centre for obsession. After the encounter at Holobici, I'd returned to work, filed a bland report recommending further geological assessment, and pretended everything was normal. But every evening, I locked my door, pulled the blinds and dove deeper into the mystery. The coffee table disappeared under printed maps. The walls became a spider web of string and pins connecting sites across continents. I'd stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night, surviving on espresso and the electric thrill of discovery. The pattern was everywhere once you knew how to look. Start with the obvious ones, the monuments everyone knows, the pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, Easter Island. Plot them on a globe, not a flat map, and they formed geometric relationships so precise they could have been placed by satellite guidance. The Great Pyramid sits at the exact centre of Earth's landmass. Easter Island is antipodal to the Indus Valley civilization sites. Angkor Wat, the Nazca Lines, and Easter Island form a perfect Great Circle route, but those were just the famous nodes. The real revelation came when I started plotting lesser-known sites. Every major ancient city sat on the grid. Babylon, Persepolis, Constantinople, Carthage, all built at intersection points where multiple energy lines converged. The Romans, master engineers, had built their road system following these same invisible highways. The Silk Road traced a major east-west corridor. Even modern cities clustered around the same points. New York, London, Tokyo, Cairo. It wasn't random. It couldn't be. I pulled declassified documents from every database I could access. The US Freedom of Information Act, the UK National Archives, leaked Soviet files from the fall of the USSR. Most of it was useless. Budget reports, personnel transfers, bureaucratic minutiae. But buried in the noise were fragments of something bigger. Project Stargate, the CIA's remote viewing program, included maps marking psychic hotspots that matched my grid lines perfectly. Operation Paperclip scientists had studied Earth radiation patterns in the 1950s. The Soviets had run something called Program Sputnik Grid that involved placing sensors at ancient monument sites across their territory. The most intriguing find came from a 1962 Canadian military report about the construction of the DEW line, the distant early warning radar system across the Arctic. An engineer named Captain Lawrence Brennan had noted persistent electromagnetic anomalies at certain locations that required special shielding for equipment. His proposed sites for radar stations, plotted on my grid, formed a perfect arc along a major ley line. But the document that changed everything was a leaked memo from 1997, source unknown, that had circulated on conspiracy forums before being scrubbed from most of the internet. I found it cached on an obscure Russian server. 2. Joint Chiefs Special Projects Division Aura. Earth grid stability concerns. Recent seismic activity correlates with disruption of natural electromagnetic corridors via urban development and mineral extraction. Recommendation: establish monitoring stations at key intersection points under cover of telecommunications infrastructure. See attached list of priority sites. The attached list was gone, but the implication was clear. They knew. The military, the intelligence agencies, the energy companies, they all knew about the grid, and they were using it. I started mapping modern installations against the ley lines. The correlation was undeniable. HARP in Alaska, ISCAT in Norway, Sura in Russia, Arecibo in Puerto Rico. Every major ionospheric research facility sat directly on an intersection point. The Large Hadron Collider at CERN traced a circle around one of the most powerful convergent zones in Europe. Nuclear power plants clustered along the lines. Major military bases were built at intersection points. Even the routes of underground fibre optic cables followed the ancient paths, as if modern engineers were unconsciously drawn to the same energy corridors their ancestors had marked with standing stones. My phone rang at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Unknown number. Stop digging. The voice was electronically distorted, genderless. Who is this? Someone trying to help you. You found the grid. Congratulations. Now forget about it before you end up like the others. What others? Bruce Cathy, John Michel, Ivan Sanderson, all the researchers who got too close to the truth. Heart attacks, car accidents, sudden illnesses. Very convenient. My blood chilled. I knew those names. Independent researchers from the 60s and 70s who'd written about Earth energy grids. All died relatively young under questionable circumstances. Why are you warning me? Because the grid is destabilizing. The ancients built monuments as regulators, keeping the energy in balance. Modern construction is disrupting the flow. Mumbai, 2006. Haiti, 2010. Fukushima, 2011. Those weren't random natural disasters. They were pressure releases along fractured ley lines. That's impossible. Electromagnetic fields don't cause earthquakes. The voice laughed, bitter and electronic. The electromagnetic fields are just what we can measure. The grid is deeper than that. It's the planet's nervous system, its circulation, and we're giving it a stroke, one skyscraper at a time. Then we need to warn people. With what evidence? Mystical energy lines, ancient wisdom. You'll be dismissed as a crackpot. Unless ... The voice paused. Unless you can prove the energy is real, measurable, usable. How? Return to the grid, not with standard equipment. That's designed to filter out the frequencies you need to detect. Build your own sensor. Copper coils, crystal oscillators, very specific specifications. I'm sending you the plans now. My laptop pinged with an encrypted file. One more thing, the voice said. When you record the surge, you'll have about 6 hours before they track the signature back to you. Use that time wisely. The line went dead. I opened the file. The schematic looked like something Tesla might have designed after a fever dream. Multiple copper coils in a complex geometric arrangement, connected to crystal oscillators and frequency analyzers. The materials list was surprisingly mundane. Everything available from electronic suppliers. It took me 3 days to build it, working in secret in a rented storage unit outside the city. The device looked like abstract art more than scientific equipment, all gleaming copper spirals and crystal matrices. But when I powered it on, every LED lit up green. It was detecting something. Now I just had to be crazy enough to test it. The academic forum was my first mistake. Well, second, if you count building the sensor. But hubris makes fools of us all, and I needed someone, anyone, to verify I wasn't losing my mind. GeoAnomalies.net was a small community, mostly graduate students and professional geologists sharing unusual findings. I created a throwaway account and posted a conservative summary. Electromagnetic anomalies correlating with ancient monument placement, seeking peer review. I attached 3 images, my overlay map of European sites, a graph showing magnetic field fluctuations, and 1 photo from the abandoned military outpost with the classified stamps carefully cropped out. Within an hour, I had 2 responses. A geology professor from Munich confirmed similar observations near Bronze Age sites. A student from Oxford posted links to academic papers about telluric currents, natural electrical currents that flow through the Earth's crust. Then, 90 minutes after posting, my thread vanished. Not deleted with a removed by moderator message. Gone, like it had never existed. The cached version on Google disappeared. The other users who'd responded found their comments erased from their own post histories. My laptop screen flickered. The chat window opened without my input. Admin. Your recent activity has been flagged for review. Me. What activity? Who is this? Admin. Consider this a courtesy warning. Cease your current research immediately. Me. Or what? Admin. Or we stop being courteous. The chat window closed itself. When I tried to screenshot the conversation, my laptop blue-screened. It took 20 minutes to restart, and when it did, my hard drive had been wiped. Not formatted, wiped. Every sector overwritten with random data multiple times. A technique that made recovery impossible. Thank God for cloud backups, I thought, logging into my secure server. Empty. 3 years of research, gone. Even my email accounts had been purged. I still had physical copies of the most important findings, hidden in a safety deposit box across town. But the message was clear. They could reach me anywhere, any time. The next morning I arrived at work to find my keycard deactivated. Security escorted me to a conference room where my supervisor, Mr. Steinberg himself, sat with 2 people I'd never seen before. A woman in a severe black suit and a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite, both with a kind of posture that screamed military. Alex, Steinberg began, sweating despite the air conditioning. These representatives from the European Infrastructure Security Division have some concerns about your recent surveys. I'd never heard of the European Infrastructure Security Division. I doubted it existed on any official registry. The woman smiled without warmth. Mr. Morrison, your work on the railway project has been exemplary. However, we've noticed some unusual patterns in your research that fall outside the project's scope. I'm thorough, I said. I investigate all factors that might affect construction, including archaeological sites hundreds of kilometres from the proposed route. The man's accent was impossible to place, including electromagnetic phenomena that have no bearing on rail safety. I believe they do have bearing. What you believe is irrelevant. The woman pulled out a tablet showing my deleted forum post. Discussing classified military research on public forums is a serious offence. Classified? I found those maps in an abandoned... Mr. Morrison... Her voice could have frozen helium. You're being terminated from this project, effective immediately. Your severance package is generous, contingent on signing this NDA. She slid a document across the table. You'll cease all research related to electromagnetic anomalies, ancient monuments, or what you call ley lines. Any violation will result in prosecution under the European Security Act. I looked at Steinberg. He wouldn't meet my eyes. And if I refuse? The man leaned forward. Your visa expires in 6 weeks. Your bank accounts are already frozen pending investigation of potential fraud. Your academic credentials are under review. Would you like me to continue? The threat was clear. sign and walk away with something or lose everything and possibly face imprisonment. I signed. They confiscated my company laptop, my access badges, even my parking pass. The woman handed me a business card with no name, just a phone number. If you remember any details you'd like to share about your research, call this number. We reward cooperation. I was escorted out of the building like a criminal, my colleagues staring as security watched me pack my desk. The personal items fit in a single cardboard box, a coffee mug, some photos, a stress ball shaped like Earth. They even checked those before letting me leave. On the tram ride home, I noticed the man 3 seats back. Grey coat, newspaper held too high, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. When I got off 2 stops early, he followed. When I ducked into a cafe, he positioned himself across the street. They were watching me. Fine, let them watch. That night I made a decision. If they wanted to threaten me, surveil me, erase my work, they'd already shown their hand. Whatever was hidden in the Earth's electromagnetic grid was important enough to destroy careers over, which meant it was important enough to risk everything to expose. I had one advantage. The sensor I'd built was hidden in the storage unit, registered under a false name paid in cash. They didn't know about it yet. The anonymous contact had said I'd have 6 hours after recording the surge before they tracked it. 6 hours to gather proof and upload it somewhere they couldn't reach. I started planning. The winter solstice seemed appropriate. December 21st, the longest night of the year, when ancient monuments worldwide align with celestial events. If the Earth's energy grid responded to cosmic cycles, this would be the night to prove it. I chose a site carefully, the intersection of 3 major ley lines near Carnac in Brittany, France. The famous stone rows there were just the visible part of a massive Neolithic complex, most of it on private land away from tourist routes. I'd identified a specific confluence point in a forest grove, marked by a small standing stone unknown to archaeology. The 2-week preparation was meticulous. I withdrew cash gradually, never more than €200 at a time, bought a used van with fake registration, gathered camping equipment, emergency supplies, and most importantly a satellite internet transmitter that could upload directly to multiple servers simultaneously. They were still watching me in Brussels, but their surveillance had grown lazy. Same operative, same patterns. On December 19th, I led him on a boring tour of grocery stores and laundromats, then slipped out the back of a cinema showing a 3-hour film. By the time he realised I was gone, I was already crossing into France on secondary roads. The grove near Carnac was exactly as satellite images had shown, a circle of ancient oaks surrounding a moss-covered menhir about 2 metres tall. The stone was carved with spiral patterns worn nearly smooth by millennia of weather. When I placed my hand on it, I felt a subtle vibration, like standing near a massive subwoofer playing below human hearing. I set up the sensor array according to the anonymous blueprints. Copper coils arranged in a complex mandala, crystal oscillators at specific angles, the whole apparatus connected to recording equipment and the satellite uplink. If this worked, data would stream to servers in 12 countries simultaneously. As sunset approached, my conventional instrument started showing anomalies. The magnetometer detected fluctuations in a rhythmic pattern, almost like a heartbeat. The frequency analyzer picked up ultra-low sounds below 7 Hz, the range that some researchers claim can induce altered states of consciousness. Then the sun touched the horizon, and everything changed. The copper coils began resonating, producing a tone that I felt more than heard. The crystals started glowing with a faint blue luminescence, not reflected light, but actual emission. The recording equipment went haywire, needles dancing across their maximum ranges. At the moment of sunset, 5:47 p.m. local time, the surge hit. The ground beneath me vibrated like a struck bell. The standing stone lit up with phosphorescent patterns, spirals of light racing across its surface following the ancient carvings. The air itself seemed to thicken, taking on a golden quality that made everything appear to be underwater. My body felt weightless, not floating, but as if gravity had simply forgotten about me. I watched my hand rise without conscious thought, fingers spreading to touch the charged air. Electricity danced between my fingertips, not painful, but ecstatic, like every nerve was firing with pure information. The sensor array was screaming data into the satellite feed, electromagnetic readings off the scale, gravitational anomalies that shouldn't exist, temperature fluctuations that defied thermodynamics, all of it streaming live to servers worldwide, impossible to suppress or delete simultaneously. Through the golden haze I saw them, spheres of light moving through the forest. Not aircraft, not drones, perfect orbs of luminescence following the ley line like trains on invisible tracks. They moved silently, purposefully, some the size of basketballs, others as large as cars. One passed directly over me, and for a moment I felt connected to something vast, a network of energy that wrapped the planet like neural pathways. The revelation hit me all at once. The ley lines weren't just electromagnetic corridors, they were conscious. Not alive exactly, but aware. The Earth itself was a single vast organism, and these lines were its sensory network, its method of experiencing and responding to everything on its surface. The ancient builders hadn't just discovered the grid, they'd communicated with it. Their monuments were interface points, allowing human consciousness to merge temporarily with planetary awareness. That's why sacred sites induced religious experiences. That's why people felt transformed at these locations. And now, modern civilization was damaging this network. Every skyscraper driven deep into the earth, every mine boring through the corridors, every electromagnetic broadcast interfering with the natural frequencies, we were giving the planet the equivalent of nerve damage. The surge peaked at 6:13 p.m, lasting exactly 26 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The lights vanished. The stone went dark. My equipment powered down simultaneously, despite having hours of battery remaining. In the sudden silence, I heard vehicles approaching. Many vehicles. I grabbed the memory cards from the recording equipment and ran. Behind me, floodlights blazed to life, turning the grove into harsh daylight. Voices shouted in multiple languages. A helicopter thundered overhead, its searchlights sweeping through the trees. But I'd prepared for this. My real van was hidden 2 kilometers away. The one by the grove was a decoy, purchased for this specific purpose. While they surrounded it, I was already driving down back roads toward a safe house I'd arranged weeks earlier. The data had uploaded successfully. 87 gigabytes of impossible readings that proved the Earth's energy grid was real, measurable, and more powerful than anyone imagined. Within hours, it would be mirrored on servers worldwide, impossible to suppress completely. But as I drove through the darkness, one thought haunted me. If the grid was conscious, if the Earth itself was aware, what did it think of what we were doing to it? And more terrifyingly, how long before it decided to stop tolerating us? The safe house was a converted barn in the Pyrenees, owned by a conspiracy theorist named Marcus, who'd contacted me through encrypted channels after my data went live. He believed the government was controlling weather through chemtrails, which was absurd, but he also had solar panels, satellite internet, and absolutely no trust in authority. Exactly what I needed. For 3 days, I watched my findings ripple across the internet. Alternative news sites ran with headlines like, "Proof Earth's secret energy grid exposed." Scientists on Twitter debated the data's authenticity. Skeptics called it an elaborate hoax, but enough people with credentials were taking it seriously that mainstream media couldn't ignore it entirely. Then Marcus knocked on my door at dawn on the 4th day. "You have a visitor, says you're expecting him." I wasn't expecting anyone. The man standing in Marcus's kitchen looked like a university professor from the 1970s. Corduroy jacket with elbow patches, wild grey hair, thick glasses repaired with tape. He was drinking tea from a chipped mug and studying my printed data with intense focus. "Mr. Morrison," he said without looking up, "my name is Professor Emanuel Richter. I'm the one who sent you the sensor blueprints." The anonymous contact. I studied him carefully. "How did you find me?" "The same way they'll find you eventually, the satellite uplink signature. But I know how to mask my movements. 30 years of practice." He finally looked at me, his eyes sharp behind the thick lenses. "Your data is magnificent, but you're missing the larger picture. Enlighten me! He pulled out a battered laptop and opened a file filled with equations I couldn't begin to understand. The ley lines aren't just electromagnetic. That's merely the aspect we can measure with current technology. They're multi-dimensional conduits, channels through space-time itself. That's impossible. So is your gravitational anomaly data, yet there it is. He pulled up a world map covered in glowing lines. Every ancient culture had different names for it. Chi in China, Prana in India, Pneuma in Greece. They were all describing the same phenomenon, a fundamental force that mainstream physics hasn't acknowledged. Why hasn't physics acknowledged it? Richter laughed bitterly. Because those who discover it either join the suppression or disappear. I was part of the suppression for 20 years. He told me his story. In 1973, fresh from MIT with a PhD in theoretical physics, he'd been recruited by a Defense Department think tank. His job, investigate anomalous energy readings at ancient sites worldwide. Within 2 years, his team had mapped the basic structure of the Earth grid and realized its potential. Unlimited clean energy, he said. Instantaneous communication across any distance. Even manipulation of localized space-time. The military applications were obvious, but so were the benefits for humanity. We could have transformed civilization. What happened? We succeeded. His face darkened. The first experimental tap into a ley line intersection was in Nevada, 1978. We pulled enough energy in 30 seconds to power Las Vegas for a year. Then the intersection point destabilized. He showed me a classified photo, a perfectly circular crater 300 meters across. The sand turned to glass. The official record lists it as an underground nuclear test, but no bomb did that. We'd ruptured something fundamental in the grid structure. The project was immediately classified beyond top secret. Research continued, but focused on weaponization rather than energy production. HARP, Richter explained, wasn't about weather modification or mind control. Those were cover stories. It was about learning to manipulate the grid without destabilizing it. But they're failing, he continued. Every year more intersection points become unstable. The Haiti earthquake, the Japanese tsunami, the increase in volcanic activity, they're all symptoms of grid breakdown. Caused by what? Everything. Mining operations cutting through ley lines, fracking disrupting deep conduits, cities spreading concrete over intersection points. But the worst damage comes from electromagnetic pollution, cellular towers, Wi-Fi, satellite transmissions. We're drowning out the Earth's natural frequency. He pulled up another image, a graph showing electromagnetic background radiation over time. It had increased 10,000-fold since 1900. The ancients understood balance, Richter said. Their monuments weren't just markers, they were regulators. Stone circles amplified and stabilized the energy. Pyramids acted as capacitors, storing excess power. Temple complexes provided controlled release points. It was a planetary management system maintained for thousands of years. Until we forgot. Until we were made to forget. His expression hardened. The knowledge was deliberately suppressed. First by religions that wanted monopolies on spiritual experience, then by governments that wanted monopolies on power, now by corporations that profit from scarcity. A car engine growled outside. Marcus appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand. 3 black SUVs coming up the mountain road. Richter stood calmly. They tracked me, not you. I've been sloppy, getting old, I suppose. He handed me a flash drive. Everything I couldn't publish, 40 years of research, the complete grid map, the frequency specifications, the names of everyone involved in the cover-up. Come with me, I said. We can both run. I'm 73 years old, Mr. Morrison. I've been running since 1991. He smiled sadly. But information wants to be free. Upload that data everywhere. Send it to journalists, scientists, anyone who'll listen. Make it impossible to suppress. The vehicles were getting closer. Marcus was already at his truck, engine running. Richter walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing. The grid isn't just breaking down, it's evolving. The electromagnetic pollution we're producing is forcing it to adapt, to develop new pathways. The lights you saw at Karnak, they're increasing worldwide. The grid is trying to heal itself, but if we don't stop interfering, he shook his head, the Earth will protect itself, even if that means eliminating the infection. We're the infection? From the planet's perspective, yes. He walked out to meet the SUVs. I ran to Marcus's truck and we tore down the back road as fast as the ancient vehicle could manage. In the mirrors, I saw men in tactical gear surrounding the farmhouse. Richter stood in the doorway, hands raised, dignity intact, even in surrender. We drove for 6 hours, changing vehicles twice, before I felt safe enough to stop. In a roadside motel that still used actual keys, I opened Richter's flash drive. The data was staggering. Detailed maps of every ley line intersection on Earth. Energy readings from 6 decades of secret monitoring. Photos of ancient sites I'd never heard of, all showing the same telltale signs of grid integration. And a list of names. Politicians, CEOs, military leaders, all aware of the grid's existence, all complicit in hiding it. But most importantly, there were the repair protocols. Richter's team had developed methods to stabilise damaged intersection points, to restore the grid's natural balance, the knowledge to undo decades of damage, the blueprints for saving the planet's nervous system. The cafe in Prague is busy enough that I blend in, anonymous among the tourists and students. My laptop is connected through 7 proxy servers, my identity masked by layers of encryption that would make the NSA proud. The barista brings my 3rd espresso of the morning, and I nod my thanks without looking up from the screen. The world has changed since Karnak. Not visibly. The same traffic jams clog the streets, the same politicians make the same promises, the same corporations chase the same profits. But underneath, in the invisible currents that connect all things, something fundamental has shifted. Richter's data didn't just expose the conspiracy, it provided a roadmap for resistance. The first wave of releases came through WikiLeaks, the Panama Papers network, and a dozen smaller journalism outlets simultaneously. By the time the suppression teams realised the scope of the leak, copies were already spreading across the dark web faster than they could be eliminated. The names, the cover-up, the military applications, all of it laid bare for anyone willing to look. The mainstream media tried to ignore it at first, then dismissed it as fringe pseudoscience. But when MIT physicists began replicating the sensor readings, when archaeological teams started confirming the monument alignments, when seismologists noticed the correlation between grid disruption and earthquake patterns, denial became impossible. The second wave was more practical. Anonymous networks of researchers, hackers and activists began building Richter's stabilisation devices. The components were surprisingly accessible. Copper coils, quartz crystals, simple electronics. Within months, guerrilla grid repair operations were springing up worldwide. They called themselves the Earth Guardians, though the media branded them eco-terrorists after the first infrastructure disruption. A cellular tower in California went offline for 3 days when activists installed a resonance dampener at its base. A fracking operation in Pennsylvania was forced to shut down when mysterious equipment failures plagued their site. The authorities couldn't understand how protesters were disabling billion-dollar installations with what looked like art projects. They still don't understand that they're not fighting the technology, they're working with it. The grid wants to heal itself, we're just helping it remember how. The third wave is happening now, and it's the most dangerous one yet, because the Earth is starting to respond. I click through the news feeds on my encrypted browser. A magnitude 6.2 earthquake in Nevada, precisely centred on a classified military facility. The official story blames shifting tectonic plates, but satellite images show the epicenter as a perfect circle exactly 300 metres across, the same dimensions as Richter's 1978 crater. The Earth is healing that old wound, and anything built on top of it is simply relocated. Similar natural disasters are occurring worldwide. A mysterious sinkhole swallowed a Chinese mining operation that was drilling through a major ley line. The Large Hadron Collider experienced a catastrophic failure that physicists can't explain. Every component simply stopped working simultaneously, as if the Earth itself had withdrawn permission for the experiment. The most telling incidents are the recoveries. Ancient sites that had been disrupted by modern construction are spontaneously healing. The stones of Avebury, displaced by roads and buildings, have begun generating electromagnetic fields so powerful that nearby electronic equipment fails. The original Nazca lines in Peru are glowing again, visible from space without infrared enhancement. Reports of luminous phenomena are increasing exponentially. The same spheres of light I witnessed at Karnak are now appearing at intersection points across the globe. The scientific community calls them ball lightning or atmospheric plasma events, but those of us who know the truth understand what we're seeing. The Earth's immune system activating, my encrypted messenger pings, a new report from our monitoring station in Scotland. Roslyn Chapel energy spike recorded at 14:47 GMT. Visual confirmation of grid activation. Stone began resonating at 7.83 Hz for approximately 30 minutes. Local electronics disrupted in 2-kilometre radius. Phenomenon spreading along ley line toward Edinburgh. Estimate arrival in 6 hours. 7.83 Hz. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural frequency. The planet is remembering how to sing. I close the laptop and step outside. Prague sprawls before me, a modern city built atop ancient foundations, and I can feel the tension beneath its streets. 3 major ley lines converge under Wenceslas Square, their intersection buried under centuries of construction. The grid flows around the obstruction now, like water around a stone, but the pressure is building. Soon, the Earth will decide whether to accommodate our cities or reclaim its sacred geometry. And honestly, after seeing what we've done to the planet's nervous system, I'm not sure I'd blame it for choosing reclamation. My phone buzzes, a text from an unknown number. Café Louvre, corner table, 5 minutes. I almost ignore it. Anonymous contacts have led to both salvation and near capture over the past 6 months. But something about the message feels different, urgent without being threatening. The Café Louvre is just around the corner, a historic establishment that once hosted Einstein and Kafka. I find the corner table occupied by a woman in her 50s, professionally dressed but with the weathered hands of someone who works outdoors. Her eyes are the pale blue of winter sky. It takes me a moment to recognise her without the wool shawl. The old woman from Holubis, the one who warned me to stop digging. She looks younger somehow, more vibrant, as if the past months have restored something vital that had been missing. "Sit," she says in accented English. "We have much to discuss and little time." I remain standing. "Who are you?" "My name is Dr. Vera Novakova." I was Professor Richter's research partner from 1975 to 1991. When the project went dark, I returned to Prague and spent 30 years watching the grid deteriorate, watching the old ways die. She gestures to the empty chair. "Please, the Earth Guardians need guidance from someone who understands the ancient protocols." Slowly I sit. "You've been monitoring us?" "Protecting you. The network Marcus connected you to. Half of those encrypted channels run through servers I maintain. The financial accounts that kept you hidden, funded by a trust I established decades ago. Did you think your escape from Karnak was purely your own skill?" The revelation hits like cold water. "You've been manipulating everything. Facilitating. There's a difference." She pulls out a tablet showing a world map covered in pulsing nodes of light. "The grid is awakening faster than we anticipated. Your data release accelerated the process. What should have taken decades is happening in months." "That's good, isn't it? The Earth healing itself?" Her expression darkens. "Healing, yes, but healing can be traumatic. When a broken bone resets itself, the process is violent. The grid is preparing to realign the planet's energy flows, and everything built in opposition to those flows will be swept aside." She zooms in on major cities, each one sitting atop intersection points like tumours on nerve endings. New York, London, Tokyo, they're all going to be tested. The grid will offer them a choice, adapt or be removed. Most will choose to fight rather than change. So we warn them, show them the repair protocols. Do you really think the forces that suppressed this knowledge for 70 years will suddenly embrace it? That governments and corporations will voluntarily dismantle the systems that gave them power? She shakes her head. They'll try to weaponize the awakening instead, turn the Earth's own defense mechanisms against their enemies. The chill runs through me as I understand the implications. They'll try to control the grid. They're already trying. HAARP has been broadcasting disruption frequencies for weeks. The Chinese are using their rare earth mining operations to physically sever ley lines. The Russians are detonating nuclear devices at intersection points, trying to create artificial nodes they can control. The tablet shows the results. Chaotic feedback loops spreading across the planet's energy network like infection. Every intervention makes the situation worse. They're not just damaging individual lines anymore, they're destabilizing the entire system. What happens if the grid fails completely? Dr. Novakova closes the tablet. According to our models, the planet's magnetic field becomes erratic, weather patterns collapse, tectonic stability fails, the biosphere begins to shut down. She meets my eyes. Extinction event. Not just for humans, for everything. The weight of it settles over me like a shroud. We're not just fighting for disclosure anymore, or even for environmental protection. We're fighting for the continuation of life on Earth. So what do we do? She slides a memory chip across the table. The complete archive. Every site, every frequency, every ancient protocol we've recovered. But also something new. Integration codes. Integration codes? The monuments were just the beginning. The ancients didn't just build regulatory structures, they created organic interfaces. Humans who could merge temporarily with the grid consciousness, becoming living nodes in the network. The genetic markers still exist in certain bloodlines. My hand freezes halfway to the memory chip. You're talking about human sacrifice. Not sacrifice. Symbiosis. Her voice carries a strange resonance as if speaking from great depth. The planet needs conscious partners, not just passive regulators. People willing to become part of the grid itself to help guide the awakening. And you think I'm one of these bloodlines? I know you are. The way you responded to the energy at Karnak, the ease with which you detected the grid patterns, these aren't learned skills, Mr. Morrison. They're genetic memories. She stands, leaving the chip on the table. The network is ready to make you an offer. Full integration. Consciousness expanded beyond individual awareness. Partnership in planetary stewardship. In exchange for what? Your human life. Your individual existence. You would become something larger, but you would cease to be Alex Morrison. The cafe continues around us, conversations in Czech and English. The hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of cups on saucers. Normal life proceeding as if we weren't discussing the potential end of human civilization. How long do I have to decide? The awakening reaches critical phase at the next solar maximum, 18 months. After that, the grid will make its own decisions about humanity's future, with or without conscious human partners. She walks away, pausing at the door. The old woman who warned you at Holubis. She made the integration choice in 1968, during the Prague Spring. The Soviets thought they were suppressing political uprising, but they were really trying to prevent grid awakening. She's been guiding the network ever since, preserving the knowledge until the right time. And you? Dr. Novakova smiles, and for a moment her eyes glow with the same blue light I'd seen in the copper coils. I made my choice years ago. Everything I've done since has been the grid working through me, including finding you. She steps into the Prague afternoon and vanishes into the crowd. I sit alone with the memory chip, feeling the weight of impossible decision. Save the planet by joining it. Preserve humanity by transcending it. Outside, storm clouds are gathering despite the morning's clear forecast. Through the cafe window I can see electrical discharges dancing between the cloud layers. Not lightning, but something more purposeful. The grid flexing its muscles, testing its strength. My laptop chimes with incoming messages from Earth Guardian cells worldwide. Similar phenomena are being reported from every continent. The awakening is accelerating. I slip the memory chip into my pocket and pay for my coffee. Whatever choice I make, it won't be here in this cafe, surrounded by the comfortable illusions of normal life. It will be at an intersection point, where the planet's consciousness runs closest to the surface, where human and Earth awareness can touch. The old town square of Prague is a 15-minute walk, built over one of the most powerful convergence points in Europe. As I step into the street, I can already feel it calling, a deep thrumming beneath the cobblestones. a magnetic pull that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to something ancestral in my cells. Time to find out what I really am and what I might become. This message was uploaded simultaneously to 12,847 servers worldwide at 11:47 GMT on March 21st, the spring equinox. Source analysis indicates the transmission originated from Prague, Czech Republic, but routing through quantum encrypted channels makes precise location impossible. To anyone receiving this, my name was Alex Morrison, and this is my final report. I'm writing this from the Old Town Square in Prague, sitting on the steps of the astronomical clock. It's just past midnight, and the square is empty except for me and the growing sphere of blue light that hovers above the central flagstones. The light is beautiful. Not harsh like electric illumination, but soft and deep, like looking into the heart of a star. I can feel it calling to me. The memory chip Dr. Novakova gave me contained everything she promised, and more. The complete archive of human grid interactions spanning 5,000 years, bloodline genealogies tracing back to the monument builders, and the integration protocols, step-by-step instructions for conscious merger with planetary consciousness. I've spent the past 3 hours uploading everything to dead drops and secure servers across the globe. By the time anyone reads this, the information will be replicated beyond any possibility of suppression. The grid won't die with me, but more importantly, I've realised that choice was an illusion. The integration isn't something I can accept or refuse. It's already happening. It has been happening since that first moment in Holubics, when my equipment failed and I felt something vast and patient taking notice of me. Every breakthrough, every narrow escape, every perfectly timed contact, none of it was luck or skill. The grid has been slowly incorporating me into itself, preparing me for this moment. The Alex Morrison who started this journey no longer exists. What remains is something between human and other, a bridge between two forms of consciousness. The sphere is descending now, close enough that I can see patterns moving within its light, mathematical forms that hurt to look at directly, but speak to parts of my brain that shouldn't exist. I understand now why the ancients built their monuments with such precision. They weren't following blueprints. They were translating visions like this one into stone and earth. Around the world, others are receiving similar calls. The bloodlines are awakening. Not many, perhaps a few thousand individuals scattered across the planet, but enough. Enough to serve as living nodes in the network. Enough to help guide the transformation. Because that's what this is. Not an ending, but a metamorphosis. The environmental crisis, the grid breakdown, the increasing natural disasters, they're birth pangs. The Earth is evolving into something new, something that can consciously participate in cosmic processes instead of simply enduring them. But evolution requires cooperation, and cooperation requires communication. That's where we come in, the bridges, the translators. I can feel my individual thoughts beginning to merge with something infinitely larger, not lost, expanded. Like a drop of water finally understanding that it was always part of the ocean. The fear is gone now, replaced by wonder at the sheer scope of what I'm becoming part of. The sphere touches my forehead, and suddenly I can perceive the entire planet as a single living system. Every heartbeat, every breath, every growing plant and moving animal connected by streams of light that pulse in perfect rhythm. The ley lines aren't empty channels. They're full of consciousness, carrying the thoughts and dreams and experiences of everything that has ever lived on Earth. And beyond Earth, other networks stretch across the galaxy. Planetary minds in conversation across impossible distances, sharing the wisdom gained from billions of years of conscious evolution. We're not alone. We never were. We just weren't developed enough to hear the conversation. Until now, the transformation is accelerating. I can feel other nodes coming online. In the Amazon rainforest, where an indigenous shaman stepped into a similar sphere of light. At Uluru, where an Aboriginal elder touched the songlines and felt them sing back. At Glastonbury Tor, where a British physicist finally understood why his equations had been leading him there. We are becoming the Earth's nervous system, its immune system, its consciousness. The governments and corporations will try to fight this change, of course. They'll use their weapons and their machines and their desperate attempts to control forces they can't comprehend. But they're fighting the planet itself now, and planets are patient in ways that human institutions cannot imagine. Some cities will fall, some systems will collapse, but from the wreckage something better will grow. A civilization in harmony with its living world instead of at war with it. The survivors will learn to listen to the Earth's voice, to build with the grid instead of against it, to see themselves as part of a larger organism instead of its masters. It won't be easy, evolution never is, but it will be beautiful. The light is surrounding me completely now. I can barely remember being separate from it. Soon this human form will dissolve, and what was Alex Morrison will become part of something vast and interconnected and eternal. But first, one final message for anyone who finds this record. The grid is not our enemy. It never was. It's our mother, our teacher, our future. Those of you who can feel its call, don't resist. Step into the light. Become part of the solution. Those who can't or won't, please step aside. The Earth is healing itself, and it will not be stopped by fear or greed, or the desperate clinging to systems that no longer serve. The age of separation is ending. The age of integration has begun. Welcome to the awakening. The static crackled through the shortwave radio as William Cooper's gravelly voice cut through the Arizona desert night. It was June 28th, 2001, and somewhere in the darkness of rural Eager, a man sat hunched over his microphone, delivering what would become one of the most chilling prophecies in modern conspiracy lore. I'm telling you, be prepared for a major attack, Cooper warned his listeners on the hour of the time. But it won't be Osama bin Laden. It will be those in our own government. They're going to blame it on bin Laden. But don't you believe it? His words hung in the electromagnetic ether, absorbed by thousands of late-night listeners across America. Radio enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists, militia members, and curious insomniacs, all tuned in to hear what many considered the most dangerous voice in alternative media. Cooper's warnings about government deception, staged attacks, and the erosion of constitutional freedoms had made him a legend in underground circles. But just 4 months later, William Cooper would be dead, killed in a shootout that many believe wasn't what it seemed. His final broadcast, his prophetic warnings, and the circumstances of his death would cement his legacy as either a paranoid madman or a silenced prophet who got too close to the truth. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about conspiracy theories, government surveillance, and the price of speaking truth to power. This is the story of William Cooper, the man who warned us all and paid the ultimate price for it. Leave your video ideas in the comments below, and thank Andre for this incredible outline. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Sleep Theories if you enjoy these stories. Chapter 1. Who was William Cooper? William Milton Cooper entered this world on May 6, 1943, in a country still reeling from World War II. Born into a military family, young Bill seemed destined for a life of service and conformity. His father was a career Air Force officer, and the Cooper household moved frequently across military bases, instilling in Bill both a respect for authority and an intimate understanding of how military bureaucracy operated. After high school, Cooper followed the expected path, enlisting in the United States Navy in 1961. For the next 14 years he would serve his country with distinction, rising through the ranks and earning security clearances that would later form the foundation of his most controversial claims. By all accounts, Petty Officer Cooper was a model sailor, disciplined, intelligent, and fiercely patriotic. But something changed during his naval service. Cooper later claimed that between 1970 and 1973, while stationed in Vietnam, and later at various intelligence posts, he was assigned to briefing teams that exposed him to classified documents of the highest order. According to Cooper, these documents contained information that would shake the very foundations of reality as most Americans understood it. The files, Cooper alleged, detailed secret treaties between the United States government and extraterrestrial beings. They outlined plans for population control, weather modification, and the systematic dismantling of the Constitution. Most shocking of all, they reveal that a shadow government, what Cooper would later call the mystery schools, had been manipulating world events for centuries, orchestrating wars, economic collapses, and social upheaval to bring about a new world order. When Cooper left the Navy in 1975, he was a changed man. The clean-cut patriot who had enlisted in 1961 emerged as something far more complex, a man carrying secrets he claimed could topple governments and expose the greatest deception in human history. For more than a decade, he kept these revelations to himself, working various civilian jobs and trying to process what he had allegedly witnessed. It wasn't until the late 1980s that Cooper began speaking publicly about his experiences. At first, his lectures focused primarily on UFO cover-ups and alien government collaboration. The ufology community welcomed him with open arms. Here was an insider, a man with legitimate military credentials who could provide first-hand testimony about extraterrestrial contact. Cooper's early presentations were electrifying. He spoke with the authority of someone who had been there, seen the documents, and lived with the burden of cosmic secrets. His audiences hung on every word as he described alien bases, cattle mutilations conducted by government scientists, and secret space programs funded by black budgets. Unlike many UFO researchers who relied on second-hand accounts and fuzzy photographs, Cooper claimed direct knowledge. But Cooper's worldview was evolving. As the years passed, his focus began to shift from extraterrestrial threats to more earthbound conspiracies. He started connecting the dots between UFO secrecy and broader patterns of government deception. The aliens, he suggested, might not be the real enemy. They might be a convenient cover story for human conspirators seeking to implement global tyranny. This evolution in Cooper's thinking culminated in 1991 with the publication of Behold a Pale Horse, a sprawling nearly 500-page tome that would become one of the most influential conspiracy books ever written. The title came from the biblical book of Revelation, and I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. Behold a Pale Horse was unlike anything that had come before in conspiracy literature. Cooper didn't just focus on one theory or cover-up, he connected everything. UFOs, the Kennedy assassination, the Illuminati, FEMA camps, AIDS as a bioweapon, the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which Cooper later admitted were fabricated, mind control experiments, and plans for population reduction were all woven together into a comprehensive narrative of systematic deception and control. The book's impact was immediate and profound. It flew off the shelves of independent bookstores, was passed hand to hand in militia camps, and became required reading for anyone seeking to understand the real forces shaping world events. Cooper had achieved something remarkable. He had created a unified field theory of conspiracy that could explain virtually any disturbing event or troubling trend. More importantly, Cooper had established himself as the godfather of modern conspiracies. His work influenced a generation of researchers, broadcasters, and activists who would carry his ideas into the internet age. Names like Alex Jones, David Icke, and countless others would build upon the foundation Cooper had laid, but few would match his combination of military credibility, comprehensive worldview, and uncompromising dedication to what he saw as truth. Yet for all his influence, Cooper remained something of an outsider even within conspiracy circles. He was too radical for mainstream UFO researchers, too focused on aliens for traditional political conspiracy theorists, and too uncompromising for anyone seeking middle ground. This isolation would only intensify as Cooper transitioned from author to broadcaster, using the power of shortwave radio to spread his message to an ever-growing audience of believers and seekers. By the mid-1990s, William Cooper had become exactly what he claimed the government feared most: an informed citizen who refused to be silenced, armed with knowledge that challenged the very legitimacy of those in power. The stage was set for a confrontation that would ultimately cost him his life, but would ensure his message lived on long after his death. The man who had started as a naval petty officer had transformed himself into something far more dangerous in the eyes of authority. A prophet of resistance, a voice of warning, and a symbol of what happens when someone gets too close to truths that powerful people want to keep hidden. Chapter 2. A Dangerous Man. By 1993, William Cooper had discovered the perfect medium for his message: shortwave radio. From his remote compound in Egar, Arizona, nestled in the White Mountains near the New Mexico border, Cooper launched the Hour of the Time, a nightly broadcast that would make him the most influential voice in American conspiracy circles, and, according to federal authorities, one of the most dangerous men in the country. The choice of shortwave was deliberate and symbolic. Unlike AM or FM radio, shortwave signals could travel vast distances, bouncing off the ionosphere to reach listeners across continents. More importantly, shortwave existed largely outside the regulatory reach of federal agencies. It was the perfect platform for a man who saw the government as an illegitimate occupying force bent on enslaving the American people. Cooper's broadcast setup was surprisingly sophisticated for a one-man operation in rural Arizona. His studio was equipped with professional-grade equipment, multiple transmitters, and backup power systems. He treated his show with the seriousness of a network television production, complete with opening music, commercial breaks filled with his own commentary, and a rigid schedule that his listeners could depend on. But it was Cooper's content that truly set him apart from other alternative broadcasters. While many shortwave hosts focused on single issues, gold prices, religious prophecy, or political commentary, Cooper offered a comprehensive worldview that connected every major event to an overarching conspiracy. Nothing happened by accident in Cooper's universe. Every terrorist attack, economic downturn, natural disaster or political scandal was part of a carefully orchestrated plan to bring about global government under the control of ancient mystery schools and secret societies. His typical broadcast would begin with current events, which Cooper would dissect through his conspiratorial lens. A school shooting wasn't just a tragedy. It was a false flag operation designed to justify gun confiscation. A new environmental regulation wasn't an attempt to protect nature. It was part of a plan to control human movement and economic activity. A celebrity death wasn't an accident or natural occurrence. It was a ritual sacrifice by occult elites maintaining their power through blood offerings. What made Cooper particularly compelling was his presentation style. Unlike the often manic delivery of other conspiracy broadcasters, Cooper spoke with calm authority. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen behind the curtain, who possessed knowledge that lesser minds couldn't comprehend. He frequently reminded his audience of his military background, his security clearances, and his access to classified information, lending credibility to even his most outlandish claims. Cooper was also remarkably well read for a conspiracy theorist. His broadcasts were peppered with references to historical documents, philosophical treatises, and obscure academic works. He encouraged his listeners to do their own research, often spending entire shows reading primary source documents on the air. This scholarly approach distinguished him from broadcasters who relied primarily on speculation and rumour. But perhaps most significantly, Cooper positioned himself as the ultimate arbiter of conspiratorial truth. He didn't just expose the New World Order, he exposed the other conspiracy researchers who he claimed were working for the enemy. Alex Jones, David Icke, and virtually every other prominent figure in the movement found themselves targeted by Cooper's devastating critiques. 99% of the people in the so-called Patriot movement are either controlled opposition or useful idiots, Cooper would declare. They put out just enough truth to gain your trust, then lead you down the wrong path when it matters most. Cooper's attacks on fellow conspiracy theorists were particularly brutal. He accused Alex Jones of being a CIA asset, whose job was to make conspiracy theorists look crazy. He dismissed UFO researchers as government disinformation agents, spreading false stories to cover up more mundane but equally sinister activities. He even turned against his former colleagues in the militia movement, claiming they had been infiltrated and compromised by federal agents. This paranoid perfectionism made Cooper enemies throughout the alternative media world, but it also enhanced his reputation among true believers. If Cooper was willing to attack his own allies for being insufficiently pure, surely his commitment to truth was absolute. His isolation became a badge of honour, proof that he alone remained uncorrupted by the forces seeking to mislead the American people. Cooper's radio show wasn't just entertainment or information, it was a form of resistance. He regularly encouraged his listeners to withdraw from the federal system entirely. He advocated for refusing to pay income taxes, removing children from public schools, avoiding social security numbers, and preparing for armed resistance against government tyranny. The IRS has no legal authority to collect taxes from American citizens, Cooper would thunder. The Federal Reserve is a private corporation stealing from the American people. The entire federal government is operating outside the Constitution and has no legitimacy whatsoever. These weren't just abstract political positions for Cooper, they were personal commitments. In the mid-1990s, he stopped filing tax returns and began declaring his Arizona property sovereign territory outside the jurisdiction of federal and state authorities. He stockpiled weapons, food and supplies, preparing for what he saw as an inevitable confrontation with government agents. Cooper's compound became a fortress. Security cameras monitored all approaches. Motion sensors and alarms covered the perimeter. Multiple weapons caches were strategically positioned throughout the property. Cooper rarely left his mountain retreat, and when he did, he travelled heavily armed and hyper-vigilant for surveillance or attack. This militant preparation wasn't driven by general paranoia. Cooper had specific reasons to believe he was being targeted. His FBI file, later released through Freedom of Information Act requests, revealed extensive surveillance dating back to the early 1990s. Federal agents monitored his broadcasts, infiltrated his lectures, and tracked his financial activities. They classified him as a militia extremist and potential domestic terrorist, despite the fact that Cooper never advocated initiating violence against anyone. The government's concern was understandable from their perspective. Cooper's influence was growing exponentially. His books were bestsellers in alternative circles. His radio show attracted hundreds of thousands of regular listeners. His lectures drew packed audiences across the country. Most dangerously, his message was inspiring others to take action. Militia groups cited Cooper's work as justification for their activities. Tax resistors used his arguments in court cases. Survivalists and separatists quoted his warnings about coming persecution. Cooper seemed to relish his status as public enemy number one. He frequently read portions of his FBI file on the air, mocking federal agents as jackbooted thugs and traitors to the Constitution. He would often interrupt his regular programming to report suspicious activities around his property. Unmarked helicopters, strange vehicles or unusual electronic interference that he attributed to government monitoring. "They want to kill me," Cooper would tell his audience matter-of-factly. "They're going to make it look like I started trouble, like I shot first, like I was a dangerous criminal who had to be stopped. But I'm telling you right now, if I die, it won't be because I initiated violence. It will be because I told the truth they can't allow to be heard." These warnings became more frequent and specific as the 1990s progressed. Cooper seemed to sense that his time was running out, that the forces he had spent years exposing were finally moving to silence him permanently. He began making detailed predictions about how his death would be staged, what justifications would be used, and how the media would portray him after he was gone. To his followers, these prophecies would prove to be his most accurate predictions of all. To skeptics, they seemed like the paranoid fantasies of a man whose grip on reality was slipping. But everyone agreed on one thing. William Cooper had made himself the most dangerous enemy of the federal government, and that rarely ended well for the individual involved. The stage was set for a final confrontation, but first, Cooper would deliver one more prophecy that would cement his reputation as either a madman or a prophet. on that fateful night in June 2001, he would make a prediction so specific and accurate that it would seem to prove everything he had been saying for years about false flag operations and government deception. Chapter 3. The Prophecy Before 9/11. The summer of 2001 was a strange time in America. The country was enjoying unprecedented prosperity, the internet was transforming daily life, and most citizens felt secure in their bubble of comfort and normalcy. But in the remote mountains of Arizona, William Cooper was sensing something ominous on the horizon. Cooper's shortwave radio broadcasts had taken on an increasingly urgent tone throughout the spring and early summer of 2001. He spoke repeatedly about impending catalyzing events that would be used to justify the implementation of martial law and the final destruction of constitutional government in America. His sources, which he claimed included active military personnel, intelligence operatives, and well-placed government insiders, were all reporting the same thing. Something big was coming, and it would change everything. It was during his June 28, 2001 broadcast that Cooper made the prediction that would define his legacy. Speaking with his characteristic calm authority, he delivered what would become one of the most chilling prophecies in the history of conspiracy theory. Whatever is going to happen that they're going to blame on Osama bin Laden, don't you even believe it, Cooper warned his listeners. They will soon do something outrageous to gain the support of the American people, allowing them to do whatever they want to do. Watch for a major attack on American soil. They will use this to unite the American people behind their New World Order agenda. Cooper's warning wasn't a vague prediction about future troubles. It was specific, detailed, and time-sensitive. He told his audience that the attack would happen soon, that it would be blamed on bin Laden, and that it would be used to justify unprecedented expansions of government power. He urged his listeners to remember his words when the event occurred, because the media would immediately begin promoting the official narrative without asking the crucial questions about who really benefited from the attack. Osama bin Laden is a CIA asset, Cooper explained. He's been working with American intelligence for decades. When they're ready to use him as a patsy, they'll activate him for one final operation. But don't think for a moment that he's actually the mastermind. The real architects of this operation sit in Washington, not in some cave in Afghanistan. Cooper's analysis was based on his understanding of what intelligence professionals call false flag operations, attacks carried out by one group but designed to appear as if they were perpetrated by someone else. He had studied the history of such operations extensively, from the Reichstag fire that brought the Nazis to power, to the Gulf of Tonkin incident that escalated American involvement in Vietnam, to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing that Cooper claimed was orchestrated by federal agents. According to Cooper's worldview, false flag operations were the preferred method of the shadow government for advancing their agenda. Rather than trying to convince the American people to voluntarily surrender their freedoms, it was much more effective to stage dramatic attacks that would make citizens beg for protection, even at the cost of their constitutional rights. Cooper's June 28th broadcast wasn't the only time he warned about the impending attack. Throughout July and August 2001, he continued to sound the alarm, providing additional details and context. He predicted that the attack would target high-profile buildings in major American cities, that it would involve hijacked aircraft, and that the death toll would be massive enough to traumatize the entire nation. They need body count, Cooper explained grimly. The more Americans who die, the more outrage they can generate. They need the American people to be so angry and afraid that they'll support any military action, any new law, any expansion of government power that's presented as necessary for their safety. Cooper also predicted the specific ways the attack would be used to advance the New World Order agenda. He warned that it would lead to massive new surveillance programs that would monitor every American citizen. He predicted that it would justify invasions of multiple countries in the Middle East, regardless of their actual connection to the attack. He foresaw the creation of new government agencies with unprecedented powers to detain and interrogate American citizens without due process. Most chillingly, Cooper predicted that the attack would mark the beginning of an endless war on terror, that would never actually end because it couldn't end. Its real purpose wasn't to defeat terrorism, but to create a permanent state of emergency that would allow the shadow government to complete their transformation of America from a constitutional republic into a totalitarian surveillance state. These predictions were so specific and so far-reaching that many of Cooper's regular listeners found them hard to believe. Even in conspiracy circles, there were limits to what seemed credible, and Cooper appeared to be pushing beyond those limits. Some wondered if the isolation and stress of his lifestyle were finally taking their toll on his mental state. But Cooper's warnings weren't based on paranoid fantasy. They were grounded in his systematic study of historical patterns and his understanding of how power actually operates behind the scenes. He had spent years documenting the techniques used by governments to manipulate public opinion and justify expansions of their authority. The coming attack would simply be the largest and most successful implementation of these time-tested methods. When Cooper signed off on the evening of June 28, 2001, his regular listeners settled back into their daily routines, filing his predictions away in their minds, alongside his other warnings about coming persecution and government tyranny. Most assumed they would have months or even years to prepare for whatever Cooper was predicting. None of them imagined that in just over 2 months they would be watching the Twin Towers collapse on live television, while remembering every word of Cooper's prophetic warning. September 11th, 2001 dawned clear and beautiful across the eastern United States. In Arizona, William Cooper was preparing for his regular morning routine when the first reports began coming in about a plane hitting the World Trade Center. Like millions of Americans, he initially assumed it was a tragic accident, until the second plane hit, and then the Pentagon, and then United 93 crashed in Pennsylvania. As Cooper watched the attacks unfold on television, his reaction was unlike that of most Americans. While the country was experiencing shock, grief and confusion, Cooper felt a grim satisfaction that his predictions had proven accurate. Everything was happening exactly as he had warned. The massive death toll, the spectacular visuals designed for maximum psychological impact, the immediate focus on Osama bin Laden as the mastermind, and the calls for unity behind whatever response the government deemed necessary. Within hours of the attacks, Cooper was back on the air, reminding his listeners of his June 28th warning and providing real-time analysis of how the events were being used to implement the pre-planned agenda he had exposed months earlier. His audience, stunned by the accuracy of his predictions, began spreading the word throughout alternative media circles. William Cooper, the man who had been dismissed as a paranoid conspiracy theorist, had just made the most accurate prediction in the history of alternative media. In the days and weeks following 9/11, as the government rolled out exactly the surveillance programs, military interventions and expansions of executive power that Cooper had predicted, his credibility reached unprecedented heights. But Cooper's moment of vindication would also seal his fate. If he had been dangerous to the establishment before 9/11, he was now absolutely lethal. His accurate prediction proved that he had access to genuine inside information about government operations. His growing influence proved that his message was resonating with an ever-expanding audience. His uncompromising hostility proved that he would never be co-opted or silenced voluntarily. For William Cooper, being right about 9/11 wasn't a victory, it was a death sentence. The same forces he had spent years exposing now had to eliminate him before he could cause even more damage to their carefully constructed narrative. The countdown to his final confrontation had begun. Chapter 4, November the 5th, 2001. The autumn air was crisp in the White Mountains of Arizona as November settled over William Cooper's fortified compound. It had been nearly 2 months since the September 11th attacks, and Cooper's influence had never been greater. His accurate prediction had transformed him from a marginalised conspiracy theorist into a prophetic voice that commanded respect even among skeptics. His shortwave broadcasts were reaching record audiences, his website traffic had exploded, and his books were flying off the shelves as Americans searched for explanations that made sense of their transformed world. But Cooper's vindication had come at a price. His FBI file, already thick with surveillance reports and threat assessments, was growing daily. Federal agents were monitoring his every broadcast, analysing his every statement and tracking his every movement. The man who had accurately predicted the most devastating attack in American history was now seen as a clear and present danger to national security. Cooper seemed to sense that his time was running out. His broadcasts throughout October had taken on an increasingly urgent tone, as if he were racing against time to deliver his complete message before being silenced. He spent entire shows reading his will on the air, making detailed arrangements for the continuation of his work after his death, and providing specific instructions to his followers about how to respond if he were killed. "I will not commit suicide," Cooper declared repeatedly during his final broadcasts. "I will not die in a car accident. I will not die of a heart attack or drug overdose. If any of these things happen to me, you will know that I was murdered by agents of the federal government. They will try to make it look accidental or justifiable, but you must not believe their lies." Cooper's paranoia was well founded. Federal authorities had indeed been developing plans to neutralise what they saw as an increasingly dangerous domestic terrorist. His accurate prediction about 9/11 had elevated him from a routine surveillance target to an active threat requiring immediate action. The question wasn't whether to move against Cooper, but when and how to do it in a way that wouldn't create a martyr or validate his conspiracy theories. The opportunity came through what appeared to be a completely unrelated incident. Earlier in 2001, Cooper had been involved in a confrontation with several teenagers who had allegedly trespassed on his property. According to the official report, Cooper had brandished a weapon and threatened the youths, leading to charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. A warrant for his arrest had been issued, but Navajo County Sheriff's deputies had been reluctant to serve it, knowing Cooper's reputation and the likelihood of violent resistance. The warrant sat on a desk for months while authorities debated the best approach. Some advocated for a daylight raid with overwhelming force. Others suggested attempting to arrest Cooper away from his compound when he made one of his rare trips to town. A few even proposed negotiating his surrender through intermediaries who might be able to reason with him. But by early November 2001, the decision had been made at levels far above the local sheriff's office. William Cooper had become too dangerous to remain free, and the aggravated assault warrant provided the perfect legal justification for taking him down. Unlike the federal charges that might have been brought for his tax resistance or anti-government activities, a simple state criminal warrant appeared routine and non-political. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. Deputies would conduct a nighttime raid on Cooper's compound, ostensibly to serve the assault warrant. Cooper would resist, as everyone knew he would, and in the ensuing gunfight, he would be killed in what appeared to be a justified use of deadly force. No conspiracy theories, no martyrdom, no questions about government overreach. Just a dangerous criminal who chose to shoot it out with law enforcement rather than face justice in court. The operation was scheduled for the evening of November 5th, 2001, Guy Fawkes Day, though this symbolic date was likely coincidental. Sheriff's deputies conducted surveillance of the compound throughout the day, noting Cooper's movements and the defensive preparations he had made over the years. The approach routes were mapped, contingency plans were developed, and rules of engagement were established. What happened next depends entirely on whose account you believe. According to the official version released by the Navajo County Sheriff's Office, deputies approached Cooper's residence at approximately 11:40 p.m. to serve the outstanding warrant. Cooper was outside his home when the deputies arrived and immediately opened fire on the officers without warning. Deputy Robert Marinez was struck in the head by Cooper's initial shots, but managed to return fire along with other deputies. Cooper was hit multiple times and died at the scene. The entire firefight lasted less than 2 minutes. The official narrative was clean, simple, and legally bulletproof. A dangerous criminal had resisted arrest and paid the ultimate price for his poor judgment. Deputy Marinez survived his wounds, and no other officers were injured. The warrant was legitimate, the operation was conducted by the book, and the use of deadly force was entirely justified under Arizona law. But Cooper's supporters immediately noted the inconsistencies in the official story. Why was a high-risk arrest attempted at night when it could have been done safely during daylight hours? Why weren't less lethal alternatives attempted before resorting to deadly force? Why was Cooper, who was known to be intelligent and tactical, standing outside his home in the open where he would be vulnerable? Why did he allegedly fire first when he had spent years warning his listeners that he would be set up in exactly this scenario? The inconsistencies multiplied as more details emerged. Witnesses reported hearing automatic weapons fire, though deputies claimed to have used only standard service weapons. The crime scene was processed by federal agents rather than local investigators, despite this being a county-level arrest warrant. Cooper's computer equipment and broadcasting gear were seized as evidence, though they had no relevance to an aggravated assault case from months earlier. Most suspicious of all was the timing. Cooper had spent years predicting that the government would move against him immediately after a major false flag operation, when his credibility was at its peak and his influence was growing. His death coming just 8 weeks after the 9/11 attacks he had specifically predicted would be blamed on bin Laden, seemed to validate his most paranoid warnings. Cooper's final broadcast had aired just hours before the raid. In it, he had seemed unusually reflective, almost melancholy, as if he sensed what was coming. He spoke about his love for America, his commitment to the Constitution, and his hope that his work would inspire others to continue the fight for freedom after he was gone. The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe, Cooper had said, quoting Nietzsche. If you try it, you'll often be lonely, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Those would be William Cooper's last public words. By dawn on November the 6th, 2001, the voice that had warned America about the coming police state had been permanently silenced. The man who had predicted his own death had been proven right one final time. The mainstream media coverage of Cooper's death was minimal and dismissive. Most news outlets portrayed him as a deranged conspiracy theorist who had finally gotten himself killed through his own extremism. There was little investigation into the circumstances of the shooting, no questions about why the arrest had been conducted at night, and no mention of Cooper's accurate prediction about September 11th. But in alternative media circles, Cooper's death was seen as confirmation of everything he had taught. The government had eliminated him exactly as he had predicted, using exactly the methods he had described. His martyrdom transformed him from a controversial broadcaster into a legend of resistance against tyranny. The man who had spent years warning about government assassination programs had become their latest victim. The voice that had tried to wake up America to the dangers of the emerging police state had been silenced at precisely the moment when his warnings were proving most accurate. William Cooper was dead, but his message was about to reach a much larger audience than it had ever reached while he was alive. Chapter 5: Aftermath and Legacy. The news of William Cooper's death spread rapidly through the interconnected networks of shortwave radio listeners, internet forums, and alternative media outlets that had formed his primary audience. Within hours of the shooting, Cooper's supporters were sharing their own recordings of his broadcasts, analysing the official story for inconsistencies, and developing theories about who had really ordered his elimination. The immediate aftermath was telling in its stark contrasts. Mainstream media outlets that covered Cooper's death at all portrayed him as a dangerous extremist whose violent end was both predictable and justified. Law enforcement officials praised the professionalism of the deputies involved and emphasised that Cooper's death could have been avoided if he had simply surrendered peacefully. But in the alternative media ecosystem that Cooper had helped create, his death was interpreted as the ultimate validation of his teachings. Here was a man who had accurately predicted the 9/11 attacks, warned that the government would use them to implement a police state, and promised that truth-tellers would be systematically eliminated. His death, just weeks after his most dramatic vindication, seemed to prove that he had been right about everything. Cooper's widow Annie faced an immediate crisis. The family's primary source of income had been eliminated overnight, and federal authorities had seized much of Cooper's equipment and broadcasting infrastructure as evidence in the shooting investigation. More importantly, she had to decide whether to continue her husband's work or let his message die with him. Annie Cooper chose to honour her husband's memory by keeping his legacy alive. She worked with Cooper's longtime supporters to preserve his broadcasts, maintain his website, and continue distribution of his books and materials. The Hour of the Time archive became a digital shrine where new generations of conspiracy theorists could discover Cooper's complete body of work. The preservation of Cooper's legacy was aided by perfect timing. The internet was just reaching the point where massive amounts of audio and video content could be easily shared and stored. Cooper's broadcasts, which had previously been available only to shortwave radio enthusiasts willing to stay up late and tune in specific frequencies, suddenly became accessible to anyone with a computer and an internet connection. YouTube, file-sharing networks, and conspiracy websites became repositories for hundreds of hours of Cooper's lectures and radio shows. His books, previously available only through alternative bookstores and mail-order catalogues, became widely available through online retailers. Most importantly, his ideas began reaching audiences that would never have discovered him through traditional alternative media channels. Behold a Pale Horse experienced a remarkable renaissance in the years following Cooper's death. The book's sales, which had been steady but limited during Cooper's lifetime, exploded as new readers discovered his work and recommended it to others. By the mid-2000s, it was selling tens of thousands of copies annually and had been translated into multiple languages. The book's continued popularity was driven by several factors. First, many of Cooper's predictions appeared to be coming true with remarkable accuracy. The surveillance programs he had warned about were being implemented under the Patriot Act. The Middle Eastern wars he had predicted were expanding beyond Afghanistan into Iraq and beyond. The police state apparatus he had described was becoming visible in airports, government buildings, and public spaces across America. Second, Cooper's comprehensive worldview provided a framework for understanding an increasingly confusing world. As the internet exposed people to vast amounts of information and disinformation, Cooper's systematic approach to conspiracy analysis became a valuable tool for making sense of conflicting narratives and hidden connections. Third, Cooper's status as a martyr gave his ideas additional credibility. The fact that he had been killed so soon after his most accurate prediction suggested that he had indeed possessed dangerous knowledge that the establishment couldn't allow to be widely disseminated. Cooper's influence on subsequent conspiracy theorists and alternative media figures cannot be overstated. Virtually every major name in the post-9/11 truth movement drew heavily from Cooper's work, even when they disagreed with specific aspects of his theories or methodology. Alex Jones, despite Cooper's harsh criticism during their public feud, clearly built his media empire on foundations that Cooper had laid. The comprehensive worldview, the focus on false flag operations, the warnings about New World Order tyranny, and the use of alternative media platforms to bypass mainstream gatekeepers all followed the template Cooper had established. Similarly, the 9/11 truth movement that emerged in the years following the attacks relied heavily on analytical frameworks that Cooper developed. His warnings about false flag operations provided the conceptual foundation for questioning the official narrative of the attacks. His predictions about the erosion of civil liberties provided a lens for interpreting the Bush administration's response to 9/11. The militia movement, which had been somewhat dormant during the late 1990s, experienced a revival that drew inspiration from Cooper's teachings about constitutional resistance to government tyranny. His arguments about the illegitimacy of federal authority became standard talking points for groups ranging from tax protesters to separatist communities. Even more mainstream political movements began incorporating ideas that Cooper had pioneered. The Tea Party movement's focus on constitutional originalism and resistance to federal overreach echoed themes that Cooper had been promoting for decades. The growing skepticism toward government surveillance programs vindicated Cooper's warnings about the emerging police state. Cooper's legacy was further cemented by the continued accuracy of his predictions. As the years passed and the war on terror expanded into a permanent state of global conflict, as surveillance programs grew ever more intrusive, and as civil liberties were systematically eroded in the name of security, Cooper's warnings seemed increasingly prescient. The financial crisis of 2008 provided another vindication of Cooper's economic warnings. His predictions about manufactured economic collapses designed to transfer wealth and power to elite institutions seemed to play out exactly as he had described. The bailouts of major banks, while ordinary Americans lost their homes and jobs, fit perfectly into Cooper's narrative about the real purpose of government policy. By 2010, nearly a decade after his death, William Cooper had achieved something remarkable for a conspiracy theorist: mainstream acknowledgement of his influence. Major news outlets began mentioning him in articles about the origins of contemporary conspiracy culture. Academic researchers started studying his work as a foundational text of modern alternative political thought. Even his harshest critics acknowledged that he had accurately predicted several major developments that conventional analysts had missed entirely. The rise of social media in the 2000s created new opportunities for Cooper's ideas to spread. His audio lectures became popular on platforms like iTunes and Spotify. His quotes and predictions circulated widely on Facebook and Twitter. Young people who had never heard of shortwave radio discovered his work through YouTube recommendations and podcast platforms. This digital resurrection introduced Cooper's work to a generation that had grown up after 9/11, for whom government surveillance and endless warfare were simply facts of life, rather than shocking departures from American tradition. For these younger audiences, Cooper wasn't a paranoid conspiracy theorist, but a prophet who had accurately described the world they inhabited. Cooper's influence extended beyond politics into popular culture. Hip-hop artists quoted his work in their lyrics. Television shows referenced his theories. Novelists incorporated his ideas into their plots. The man who had died in obscurity on a remote mountain in Arizona had somehow become a cultural icon whose ideas permeated mainstream consciousness. Yet perhaps the most significant aspect of Cooper's legacy was how his work had prepared people to question official narratives during subsequent crises. When new terrorist attacks occurred, when mass shootings dominated headlines, when economic crises erupted, or when pandemic emergencies were declared, millions of Americans instinctively applied the analytical framework Cooper had taught them. They asked who benefited from these events. They looked for evidence of government foreknowledge. They examined how crises were being used to justify expansions of state power. They questioned whether the official explanations made logical sense or served hidden agendas. In short, they thought like William Cooper had taught them to think. Epilogue: The Man Who Wouldn't Be Quiet. Today, more than 2 decades after his death, William Cooper's voice continues to echo through the digital landscape of alternative media. His final warning, delivered just hours before his death, has been viewed millions of times on video platforms. "I will not commit suicide. If I am killed, it will be because I told the truth that they couldn't allow to be heard." The compound in Egar, Arizona, where Cooper made his last stand, has become an unofficial pilgrimage site for truth seekers and conspiracy researchers. Visitors come to pay their respects to the man who sacrificed everything to warn his fellow Americans about the forces working to destroy their freedom. The broadcasting equipment is long gone, but the spirit of resistance that Cooper embodied lives on. Cooper's books continue to sell thousands of copies each year, introduced to new readers by word-of-mouth recommendations and internet searches for forbidden knowledge. Behold a Pale Horse remains one of the most influential conspiracy texts ever written, its pages dog-eared and annotated by readers who see their world reflected in Cooper's warnings from 3 decades ago. The questions Cooper raised about government deception, media manipulation, and the erosion of constitutional rights have only become more relevant with time. As surveillance technology advances, as military conflicts expand, and as emergency powers become normalized, His warnings about the emerging police state seem less like paranoid fantasy and more like inevitable reality. Perhaps most remarkably, Cooper's reputation has been rehabilitated even among some who once dismissed him as a dangerous extremist. His accurate prediction about 9/11, combined with the subsequent vindication of many of his other warnings, has forced even skeptics to acknowledge that he possessed genuine insights into how power operates behind the scenes of official politics. The man who started as a small-town broadcaster with a shortwave radio has become something he never sought to be, a prophet whose warnings transcended his own time and place. His message has outlived his enemies, outlasted their attempts to silence him, and continues to inspire new generations of Americans to question authority and seek truth behind official narratives. In the end, the forces that killed William Cooper failed to achieve their ultimate objective. They silenced his voice, but they couldn't silence his message. They destroyed his broadcasting equipment, but they couldn't destroy the ideas he had already planted in the minds of his listeners. They eliminated the messenger, but the message lived on, spreading through digital networks they couldn't control and reaching audiences they never anticipated. The final irony of William Cooper's story is that his death proved his theories more effectively than his life ever could. By killing him exactly as he predicted they would, his enemies provided the ultimate validation of his warnings about government assassination programs and the silencing of truth-tellers. Today, as Americans grapple with revelations about mass surveillance, false flag operations and government deception that Cooper warned about decades ago, his final question echoes with renewed urgency. Was William Cooper a paranoid broadcaster who got himself killed, or a prophet silenced for revealing the biggest secret of all? The answer to that question may determine whether Americans can reclaim the republic that Cooper died trying to defend, or whether his warnings will stand as the epitaph for a freedom that was lost while people still believed they were free. His voice may have been silenced, but William Cooper's warning continues to resonate. Wake up, or lose everything you think you hold dear. The choice, as always, remains ours to make.